I might as well start recording if you don't mind. Okay, so we are live now. So welcome everybody, and thank you so much for being here in the Teams room, and thank you all the ones who are watching us online on our LinkedIn channel. It's my name is Paul Nunes-D. I'm the fire starter of the Health Data Forum. It's really great to have you here all from different parts of the world, and hopefully some of you and in Dubai, as I'm sure is a busy day today in the middle of a busy week, and I'm thankful for all the ones who are taking some time to follow this session from your Teams devices. With me today, I have Elena Patelos. She's going to be the moderator of this morning session. Elena Patelos is a renowned specialist in technology assessment, and she has performed many roles besides being advisor of the Health Data Forum and Data First AI Later global movement. Elena, it's really great to have you here, and as we agreed, the floor is going to be lead to you now.
Thank you very, very much. My apologies to everyone in advance for my voice will be coming and going as I'm recovering from flu. I'm very happy because we have a truly interdisciplinary interprofessional panel. The speakers have been announced. I need no introductions. So I hope that we will not only hear positioning in a presentation, but we'll really go a little bit one block, a little bit further in discourse and also in actioning, same as for those of you that have been following, pretty much similarly to what was achieved with Wales. And I think we can share that additionally separately to the minutes, but although it will be mentioned. The first speaker to be with us from today is Emmanuel Bakri, who comes from a, let's say, pure background mathematics, and he's leading the big data science initiative in École Polytechnique was leading for a few years, and then of course he created a very innovative summer school for AI. But he has also a lot of experience in handling of databases, including what is we painfully call medically administrative or hospital administrative. So I would like to pass the ball first to the first speaker, which is Emmanuel, to start our session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena. Thank you to Paul. Thank you for all the organizers. I'm very honored to be with you today. So let me share my screen. If it works, it did work a few minutes ago. So it should. It did work pretty well 5 minutes ago. So yeah, it will work, I think.
I think it's starting to, if you give it, oh, not yet, no. Yes,
yeah.
I can see your screen. Yeah. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So I'm also the chief, so thank you very much, Elena, for this introduction, but I'm also the chief scientific officer of the Health Data Hub, and it's in the name of the Health Data Hub that I'm here today, right? So let me tell you about this public interest group, right? It's a public interest group that was created about 6 years ago within the National Strategy on AI. And the main goal of the Health Data Hub is to facilitate access to health data for public interest research. And to reach this goal, we have several axes. I mean, this mission is decomposed in several axes. So you see 3 of them here. I will come back on each of them. I could have added some more, but these are the 3 main ones. First of all, we play a role in the national governance pipeline to access health data. So we're the single gateway for health data in France. We set up a secured state-of-the-art in terms of security, but also in terms of computational power platform to enable people to process their projects. And of course, we are working really closely with all the data holders to help them standardizing, creating their data, or even sometimes we help collecting some data, and then we have a data catalog. But I will come back on that. You see at the bottom here, we are today actively supports more than 200 innovative projects as of today. But this number is changing, not every day, but almost. Here are some few numbers. So you see we are about 120 people working at the Health Data Hub, so that it was, you know, a very fast scale up, because we started 6 years ago with like 10 people. And we have some major role in Europe. I'll come back on that, and particularly in the building of the first in the building and the deployment of the European Health Data Space. Many active partnerships and a lot of public talks, but I'll come back on most of these things. So let me talk about the data first. There is a law in 2019 that defined what is called in France now the Système National des Données de Santé, so that's the national system for health data. And basically this system, this health data system, has two blocks. The first one that you see at the top, SNDS main database, that is something that actually has been set up about 10 years ago now. And it's a claim database, as Elena was. That's the database Elena was referring to in the introduction. I don't know if you are aware of it, but in France, we are very, very lucky because almost everybody is reimbursed partially of almost every healthcare. So this is the database that takes care of this reimbursement. Okay, so it is made of 3 databases. The SNIRAM that you see here, so it's out care patients, so out of the hospital. So it doesn't contain any clinical data, right? It contains reimbursement data. So for instance, if you go to a doctor, you will of course have a line in this database. We'll have the list of all the drugs that was prescribed by the doctors, because you get reimbursed at the drugs, right? Now we don't know what the doctor told you, or we don't know, we don't have any diagnostic or things like that. But if you go do an X-ray, for instance, we know that there is a coding line that you did an X-ray. Now, if you go to the hospital, then you move to this database. So these 3 databases are linked together, right? You move to the database, and then basically you have the same thing, but within the hospital. And you gain one thing, is that you have an ICD-10 code, right? You have an ICD-10 code of the diagnostics, so that's very important. This is the clinical information, and then you have the same thing as we have here. And then when the person dies at the hospital or in outside of the hospital, you have in this database the medical cause of death. So again, basically we have 67 million people in this database with footprint of all the healthcare pathways. It's a very useful database that has been used for now 10 years for pharmacosurveillance, pharmacoepidemiology, but not only, it is also very used for linking to clinical database, because when you have a clinical database, you don't have any contextual information about your patients, about what happened before entering the database or after leaving the database. If you bring that, then you have a lot of contextual information, which is very important. So that is this block here. And then to this block is added now what we call the catalog of the Health Data Hub, right? And I will show you some of the bases, some of the databases. But basically, the hub has all these databases on its platform, so that you can give access very quickly to this database once you have, of course, the authorization. So these are the 23 or 22, I don't remember, databases that are as of today that are in the catalog of the Health Data Hub. So you see you have very various databases. You have like a cohort of patients for Alzheimer's. You have the National Rare Diseases Data Bank. You have even some data from big pharmas. I mean, we have a lot of very different databases. You have images, a lot of different types also of data. And all of these databases are linked to this claim database I was talking about. So it's very, very rich. Now, as I told you, we also have, we set up a platform, which is on the cloud, right? All the data are given access to on this platform. So you are accessing the platform remotely. The data are pseudonymized, okay, of course. And of course, you don't have the right to take the data out. It's a state-of-the-art technological and IT secure environment. When you enter remotely from your laptop, the platform, you have access to all the regular AI suite and all the softwares that you need to process your project, and you have access to a lot of computational power. So this is something that we negotiate before we open the securized space. But you can have several GPUs. I mean, so we have a lot of AI projects running on our platform today. And actually, within the 235 projects that we are supporting, not all of them are using our platform. We advocate the use of our platform in two cases. We don't have the vocation of saying all the data should come to our platform. That would be totally insane. We have to rely on other platforms. So, for instance, if your project does not need a lot of computational power, or is a simple project, it doesn't need to come to us, and then we would support the project, but on the platform of the hospital. Now, in two cases, whether you need a lot of computational power, it doesn't make sense to have like several platforms, national platforms with like GPUs all over France. So if you need a lot of computational power, we advocate the use of our platform. And if you need to do some multi-centric project with databases coming from different centers, so you need to link this database, so you have to go back to the person. This is very technical, and this is something that we are able to do, so we also advocate the use of our platform. Out of these two paradigmatic cases, there is not really any reason to come to our platform. Here is an example of a project that has been very successful. It's really a success story. It's a startup that is called the Implicity that is doing tele surveillance of people that are having a pacemaker, right? And they wanted to develop a deep learning algorithm, so an AI algorithm, in order to predict the risk of cardiac complication. Now, they didn't have to train the algorithm the label of cardiac complication. In order to do so, we took their pacemakers data and we linked it to the claim database. So in the claim database, you have the information that the person went to the hospital for a cardiac complication. Okay, so thankful to that link, they were able to train the algorithm, which is now FDA certified and very soon will be European certified also. So it's a really nice success story. But that's one out of 235, right? And as I told you, we are doing a lot of AI. 36% of these projects are AI. Let me show you a few of them. So this is the one I told you about already, but you see we have I don't know, like we have this one, which is on the ultrasound images. So it's very, very various projects. This is on text, right? We're talking about medical reports. I mean, we're doing many, many different things. And this is so we help people, we support projects, but we also are leading some projects. So this is a very important project that we are leading, that I'm very proud of at the national level. It is called Partage, that means shared in French. And the goal is to create a lot of digital commons on generative AI and specifically on LLM for hospitals. And you see the consortium is really big. We have more than 20 institutions. We have 20 hospitals with us, 10 research teams specialized in NLP and health. And we also have, it's not written here, we also have Mistral that you have heard. So we have a few startups, including Mistral. And with a lot, I'm not going to go over all of that, but we are going to deliver a lot of very important, so open source, everything is open source, of the very important LLM building blocks. As I told you at the beginning of my talk, we play a very important role in Europe. So I don't know if you're aware of it, but Europe has had set up a new regulation that is called the European Health Data Space, right? That regulates both the primary use of data and the secondary use. So of course, our job is to focus on secondary use, so data to be used for public interest research. So we are very proud because this regulation was really inspired by the Health Data Hub. So we worked very closely with the European Commission, and they took us as an example for setting up this space. And now the space is starting to be deployed in all the member states. Okay, it will be everything will be deployed within the next 3 years, basically. I mean, most of it. So it's a very punchy law about health data, because basically, just to give you a few examples of things that it says, the first thing that it says is that every data holders from industries or public institutions is required to share the health data that they have for public interest research. So it's a requirement, and if they don't do it, or if the delay is too long, then there will be a fine. And in each of the member states, there will be what we call health data access bodies. So it will likely be the Health Data Hub, I mean, at least a big part of it, that will be connected together in all the member states, and that will play the role of the gateway to access the health data of the country. And you'll be able also to access a central portal where you will be able to send some query about the data. So not directly about the data, but the metadata about the data available on all this network of health data access bodies. So for instance, you'll be able to say where in which country can I find the data on diabetes of type 2, and you'll have all the description and so on. And you'll have a unique form to fill up in order to access the data of the different countries. So these are different projects that are basically within the framework of the deployment of this European data space, and we led the pilot, and we led Shaped, and actually we are leading Shaped. So Shaped is the goal of Shaped, so it's a very big also consortium, and the goal here is to understand the link between AI Act and this regulation on data. And so basically how this regulation will help the development and the deployment of medical device involving AI. So we have startups with us, and we have a lot of use cases. So it's a very, very interesting project. The data will not be transferred from one country to another. So there will be a kind of federated computation. Now, whether it will be federated learning or federated or distributed computation, so on, this is not very clear yet. It has to be decided. But a priori, the data will not move out of the countries because this is too sensitive. Okay, this is about Shape. I can go on. I would like to end this presentation with what we are doing also outside of Europe, because we are extremely active. And actually, I would say that now that since we are like kind of the flagship of this European regulation, we have a lot of countries that come to us to set up some partnerships. So you see, we work with the US, with the UK, we work We have some projects with Japan. We have some project. We did a lot of things with Israel, with Canada, and so on. And maybe I should mention something that will be announced next year. Next week. Sorry, next week. You know, I guess you know that next week there will be the AI Worldwide Summit in New Delhi, in India. Yes.
Yeah, I am.
Oh, sorry. And we are going. We have a very important partnerships that will be announced officially next week, where we are going to set up a secured space on our platform so that we can transfer data, personal health data from India to France. So this is really unique. As I told you, within Europe, there is no member state that is allowing that thing because of privacy, right? But India had set up a new framework that they will advertise during the summit. That is an open source framework, and will be a proof of concept of this new framework. And we will run some use cases on French and Indian data that will be all gathered on our platform in France. So this is a very unique thing. And the European Commission actually is extremely interested in this project, but it could be the kind of framework that will be used within Europe to transfer data. This is it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very, very much. Not least for the last slide and for the announcement, because it's definitely interesting to us all. India has done quite interesting things. I will leave, I think, questions and dialogue after the next presentation, but I think part of what is interesting is that most of the work that we're seeing for progress is through initiatives or fragmentation of projects. So it's quite good to see it coalescing and coming together. Europe has put a lot of funding, and we have done these things of member states and so on. But I think one of the challenges we have also is having the entire European Union setting. So good to see. Yes, good to see some progress in that. The next speaker also is very well known, and I don't think he needs introductions, but still, Deepak Kalra, or Professor Deepak Kalra of the European Institute for Innovation through Health Data. He's a professor of health informatics, and also has some of us dual hats, so he's also a former general practitioner. He has been extensively involved over the years in the development of ISO standards, and most notably the interoperability aspects in relation to the electronic health record. And of course, a lot of projects, but also I think a lot of quite disruptive, if you like, ideas, which are pretty necessary to move a little bit forward, how we talk and act. So Deepak, thank you for coming and being with us.
Well, thank you, Elena, and thank you, Paul, also for inviting me to speak. So I'm going to take a deeper dive. Actually, it's very helpful and nice to have heard Emmanuel speaking about the big data landscape pioneered within France, but really covering not only Europe, but beyond Europe. And I'm going to take us on a deeper dive on one of the issues, one of the factors that influences how well we can use data, which is its quality, and emphasizing the importance of actually knowing the quality of the data that you're analyzing. But this is also just as a warm-up slide, really, why is it so important that we learn from data? We have increasing opportunities to take advantage of more and more data with genetic data, biological data, with richer and more detailed clinical data, captured hopefully more and more in structured and coded and analyzable form. And now I think more and more also the patient providing us with data that they can capture in their more routine lifestyle environments. We have the analytics that you've already heard from Emmanuel, including both the standard querying and distributed federated querying, but then also the role of AI, and a number of things we want to try to understand better. So these are our goals. what we would like to be able to do is to help with stratifying patients more precisely for risk factors, for prevention, for diagnosis, targeted therapies, and so on. So this is our aspiration space. This is why we are wanting to harness the power of data and also the power of AI. And from a European perspective, and please forgive that this slide and 2 or 3 slides are European, mostly it's not. I know this is a global event, but Europe has invested over more than a decade in a number of initiatives, including the Health Data Hub that you just heard about from Emmanuel, European projects and more permanent infrastructures that are building us federated environments that can support this kind of learning. Some of them are geographical, some of them focused on certain kinds of data like life sciences data. So they vary across Europe. And the big excitement in Europe right now that I won't really spend much time on because of Emmanuel is the European health data space. And just to point out to you really that the European health data space has 2 main areas of delivery. One is the citizen-facing delivery, which is where the identifiable data on individuals can more comprehensively travel around Europe and support continuity of care wherever they are in Europe. And maybe one day in the future that will become a planet-wide benefit for citizens wherever they are in the world. Their summary can travel and help the clinician to treat them well. And then the other side, the secondary use of data, the ability to analyze data at scale that you've already heard about. What I would like to do, though, is to take you on a slightly more careful look at some of the issues that we need to be careful about as we bring data together. And the first one is about the standards that may be used, hopefully being used, to represent the data. And these slides have a lot of detail. I'm not going to speak to all of the bullets on the slide, but when thinking about the source of data that might be going into an analysis environment, we should remember that the electronic health record is a very rich, person-centered representation that captures the fine-grained nuances of care delivery, linkages between data items, very robust audit trails and provenance. And so when we want to communicate between EHR systems, we need standards that can convey all of that fine-grained detail. And this is just a list of key phrases and standards that you will hopefully, many of you will recognize as being the kinds of building block standards that are needed in order to achieve this. Information model standards, clinical model standards, and terminology standards come together to represent the totality of what might be captured in an electronic health record. When we want to analyze data, though, that architecture is not ideal for big-scale analytics, the kind you heard about from Emmanuel, where what we need is big data representations. They still hold data at the individual person level, but they're not really optimized to look at the details of a single person. They have less detailed audit trails and provenance information. They don't try to capture usually version histories of changes. They need the latest copy of information about each person. They tend not to be used to exchange data directly, and I think Emmanuel made very clear the data doesn't usually leave the site. It's federated querying that is used for this purpose. And the kinds of representations that are very frequently used are OMOP, and I think later on today, Paul, there is topics covering that. But I've listed some other of the data model, common data model standards that are in use around the world. And also don't forget, you still need terminology systems to represent the content of each data element. And then we have the world of clinical trials, which is different again, and which focuses here on capturing data in a methodologically robust way, where the protocol and the method for data capture is sacred. And so the representation really makes sure you don't just know what the finding was, what the observation was, but how was it captured, in what context was it captured, what was the actual observation method that was used, and consistency and repeatability of that data is the most important thing. CDISC is the global body that is responsible for nearly all of the standards that are in use for the clinical trials environment. So when we want to bring data together and we want to now undertake big data analytics, we need to be respectful and mindful that all of these representations need to come together, because the data sources could be from any of those three locations that we bring together. And what format should we use? Well, since our goal in bringing the data together is still big data, we should still be probably looking at the big data common data models such as OMOP for this kind of purpose. But we must recognize that we are mapping into it from data sources. And so my question to you is that mapping going to result in accurate enough data for decision making? And I just want to give you one example of a situation where it's challenging. So Emily is 54 years old and goes to her GP, who observes in the clinic that her blood pressure 158/92 is raised. But Emily has actually been capturing her blood pressure at home. And when the GP looks at the blood pressure readings at home, his conclusion is that the blood pressure is really elevated in the clinic only, but not at home. And we have a phrase called white coat hypertension. In other words, you're nervous when you see a clinician, your blood pressure goes up. It's not representative of your real blood pressure. And the GP decides to reduce the blood pressure treatment, not increase it, because it is his belief that the blood pressure is fine. Now, when you bring the data into OMOP, what comes across? The observed blood pressure comes across, because that's what's stored in the EHR, and the new dose of the drug is captured, not the home measurements, not the clinical thinking. So it would appear to somebody looking at the data that the dose has been changed out of keeping with the observed blood pressure. So Emily would be miscalculated as having uncontrolled hypertension. So that's an example of where we need to be really careful when we move data between representations, that we might lose some of the context, some of the richness, and we risk misinterpretation. Now, a further conundrum that exists out there in the real world of electronic health records is how much of the data is actually held in a structured and coded form and easy to transfer into a common data model. This is a study we undertook a couple of years ago now on 24, not random hospitals, but pediatric centers. So these are expert centers across Europe that treat children and do research in children. And this is the distribution of data about their collection of information in pharmacovigilance. And what you see is a real mixture across the data elements. Some data elements are very often captured well in structured and coded form. Others are more likely to be in free text, and some are not collected at all. What it means is that when you export from a source information system like an EHR into a data model, you will have a skew in what kinds of data you get and what pieces of the pharmacovigilance or safety story you understand and what parts you don't understand, which can influence your interpretation. Now, even within the structured and coded data, you can have issues such as completeness. And this is only one of the many characteristics we can look for. I'm not going to speak to the detail on this slide, but what you can see is that we can take for any data element like mean glucose, which is not the same as observed glucose, it's a mean glucose reading. We can then define data quality rules for that, which are partially addressed by looking at the value of the mean glucose, but partially addressed by looking at complementary data items. For example, if somebody isn't actually having a glucose monitor, they won't have a mean glucose reading. So you look for correlation between data elements. And then you can reflect back to a data source. When we visit hospitals and do some of these things, we can give hospitals some feedback across many different dimensions of data quality to help them to understand the quality issues. You can fix some elements of data quality when you map, but a lot of data quality really has to be addressed at source. If it's not there, you can't always guess what the missing data is. And we then can give feedback to hospitals. For example, here we have a blue hospital and a brownish coloured or orange coloured background of other hospitals, and show back to a hospital not just the quality of the data, which was the dashboard I showed you, but what is your data quality process management like? How are you taking care of the quality of your data? Because you don't fix the data by fiddling with the data. You fix the data by addressing your quality processes, your staff training, making sure that people have responsibilities. You make sure also that you have a method of looking at the quality and discovering what the root cause is of your quality issues. And then we get to the piece of the story where we want to reuse that data. And this is a very busy slide. I'm not going to ask you to read all of these fine lines and cylinders. I just want you to understand that there is a pipeline that goes from the original data in an EHR through to the data being ready for use. And the question we have to ask ourselves is if we can examine the quality of the data source, and if we choose, and this is something that we are starting to do now in our institute, look at the quality at the other end of the mapping pipeline. What has happened to the quality along the journey? Has it degraded because we've made approximations in our mapping, as I mentioned earlier, or have we been able to apply statistical methods to impute missing data, to detect errors as we go and correct them? And is the resulting data reuse actually better quality than the source we started with? The issue is not whether it's better or not. The issue is, do you know, when you're reusing data, do you know what's happened to the quality as you get it in your fingertips to reuse? So my encouragement is that we should do something about it. Now, the EHDS has a data quality labeling strategy and is defining a data quality label that will be optional for some actors and mandatory for other actors when they make data available for reuse by the EHDS. And you can see here, I'm not going to speak to all of these data quality properties, but you can see here an impressive list of characterizations of the data set that will help somebody who wants to use it to know with confidence whether it is fit for the purpose that they intend. Are they doing data exploration, or are they actually doing something that is more close to decision making where they need real precision? Now, I've got a few slides at the end on the AI scenario. You know, and you know from Emmanuel that AI learning is now a really important exploding use case for data. And it's important for us to remember that the AI Act in Europe, and hopefully downstream AI Acts in other parts of the world, will use something like a risk classification. We know that most of the health uses of AI would be probably classified as high risk. And this means the developer is under obligation to examine their training data sets for bias, to make sure their data sources are suitable for the purpose, and to have an ongoing monitoring strategy as they keep developing and training the data. So we've been doing some work on how might a developer transparently demonstrate the quality of their data set. How might a downstream assessor, Elena, someone like you who is assessing an AI system inside the digital health technology, what evidence should a developer provide you to say, look, trust me, I have used good data? Because when you've got the product in your hand, you cannot tell how it was trained. It's impossible. It's a black box. You need to have the story behind its development. So what is what types of data set have been used? Are they the right kind of data sets to have been used? And then has the developer done something towards assessing for bias? Here on the left are a series of examples of characterizations. A few of them are about the person, like age and gender, race, lifestyle, but some of these are about the clinical characteristics. Have you taken data from general practice where the conditions are mild, and now you want the algorithm to be deployed in an intensive care unit for the same situation, but where the patient's severity of disease and complexity is very different? It's unlikely your algorithm is fit for purpose in an intensive care unit, but how do you prove where it's fit for purpose? You look at the data set, you look at your target population and say, does the data set actually represent proportionately the kind of people that are in the population I want to target? And have I done data quality assessments? And not just what did I find, but what was my conclusion about the quality? Did this mean the quality is good enough? Does this mean I have to treat this data set with care, or have I thrown it in the dustbin? It's totally unsuitable. And I want to close with a final slide, if I may, about the problem of data quality improvement, because we can improve data quality prospectively through the organizational quality processes I mentioned, by working with hospitals and GPs and say, let's improve the quality. But what about the reality of today? We have highly variable quality of data in EHRs today. And we've been involved in research which is looking at how do we help to change the game of retrospective data. So you map it into something like a knowledge graph, which allows you to bring heterogeneous data from multiple subsystems or multiple providers into a common frame of reference. So you've got a homogeneous view, semantic view of the data elements about a person that deal with the same thing. You have to go back to my chart where a lot of data is still in free text, and you've got to pull it out. You've got to supplement the structure and code with NLP, and then you need to use AI, not here for clinical care, but for caring for the data. Where might they be errors? Are there inferences you can make about missing data, correlations between data elements? At the moment, we have to have one more step, which is a human in the loop. Somebody who says, have you now corrected for everything that's wrong? Are there some red flags in the data where the patient or a clinician could correct? Hopefully over the years, as the AI gets smarter, the number of referrals to a human will go down. But right now, we see this is the pathway that is needed to ensure we can reflect better data back to care, to make healthcare safer. So when AI is not being developed, but AI is being used, that it is being fed on a patient-specific basis with the correct input parameters, so it reasons correctly. And then, of course, more accurate data for research. And finally, of course, feedback loops from the AI back to the healthcare environment to say, here is where you went wrong. Here are the systematic errors that you're failing to capture. So I hope from this presentation, you've got a feeling from me that data quality really matters if you're going to make safe inferences, develop safe AI. But it's not a black box. It's not a holy grail. It's not a vague space. It's a very precise analytic space to look at quality and do something about it. Elena, thanks very much.
Thank you very, very much, Deepak. I think you went a little bit farther also to discuss quality, so we'll come back into that. Just to say that indeed Europe featured very strongly in the two presentations because there's certain things that are happening, and also to some extent because for standards and for the HR there has been some leadership in initiatives, and it's good to see global exchange. For us downstream, in terms of assessing new health technologies or trying to have evidence-informed policies for access, it becomes critical that just before we even reach AI, that the data has a certain degree of representativeness and legitimacy, not least because we have the overarching aspect, which is also what we would like to synthesize over the next 5-10 minutes, the overarching aspect of safeguarding and actually building trust, and seeing trust not as a one-off testing moment in the consenting process in trials or in any other procedure, but as an ongoing procedure that needs to be revisited and examined iteratively with patients and even with citizens or people, I would say, because of course we have to keep in mind that more often than not, we're moving towards an environment where data will be shared the moment you are born and probably throughout your life. So there are issues of autonomy and so on. So I would like to kindly ask both you and Emmanuel to start with this overarching question. And for both of you, of course, if somebody else would like to contribute, by all means, and to tell me what you think is the core element or the overarching element that we have as a challenge at the moment in Europe in respect to trust and how this is perceived by the citizens of Europe, potentially also globally. I will start with Emmanuel for the Health Data Hub, and then I come back to you, Deepak. Thank you. Emmanuel?
Oh, it's a tough question. It's a major issue. Trust is a major issue. Yeah, and actually, I mean, I live in both worlds, the data world and the AI world, and trust is the same problem in both of these worlds. And I do think that it's maybe one of the priority of the priority is to have trust, and I think it's the hardest challenge to address. So that's the bad news. It's priority, and it's the hardest thing to address. And we have to be very careful because I see a lot of people, trying to convince every citizens that they should share the data, that it's for the good and so on. I don't think that's the right way to do it. We want the citizens to have a clear-minded choice, to be able to do a clear-minded choice. And some of them will say, no, I don't want to share because they have their reasons. But the thing we have to avoid is that people don't understand why they do their choice. So we have to educate the people. We have to teach them as neutral as possible. What are the risks of sharing the data? Because there are risks. We cannot say there are no risks. And what are the risks of not sharing the data? And this is important because we hardly talk about that. I mean, people are not really aware of that. And given that, then they make their own opinion. And it's the same thing with AI. Just saying to people, AI is going to be the big revolution, you should adopt it and so on. No, that's wrong. Explain to the people what is AI able to do really, what are the limitations today and so on, so that they can make up their mind. So I think that we will gain trust through this kind of education.
If you allow me the analogy, this is it's a benefit-risk communication mode, because we use this a lot, and I think some of the lessons from the many mistakes we made as in public health with vaccine communication, which are now backfiring, of course, could also be called for this. I would add a layer to say that because, of course, there's the equity aspect, which is important globally and also within the European setting. The populations that are, let's say, more likely to be less trusting are also the ones that are suffering to some extent even more from misrepresentation at the moment, for traditional reasons, in some cases because it could be minority groups or ethnic groups and so on, or because of very practical underserved aspect, rural populations or elderly populations or populations that traditionally data has not been captured well for lack of infrastructure or for lack of access to good care. But we keep this as an approach, and then I pass the ball to Deepak. And I don't know, maybe you can also draw. I love the example, to be honest, because it's recontextualization. Emily was not talking in the example, but perhaps she would have her own issue seeing her prescription record. Yes, please.
Yes. Well, firstly, I'd like to say I think Emmanuel's answer to you was very wise and thoughtful, because I think that, and also very honest, because I think that it is important that we do not pretend to the public, trust me, I'm a data scientist, your data is perfectly safe with me, but it is a benefit risk, as you said, Elena. The other concern I have is that if we do have to give people a choice, as Emmanuel said, and the EHDS, the European Health Data Space, does require member states to introduce an opt-out option so that people can choose not to share their data. The challenge with that, and the challenge as we globalize learning like machine learning outcomes, is democratization of the data. If we have an opt-out from selected population subgroups who feel vulnerable, for example, a minority ethnic community or sexual preference community within a country, we actually amplify the bias in our data. But also, as we translate from one place to another, do we believe that an algorithm developed in, a center in London is capable of being dropped into Dubai, being dropped into Nairobi, and is going to function equally well in those populations with their health systems and their different treatment profiles and so on? I don't think we can guarantee bias-free, but let's not pretend that either. But transparency and a standardized method of assessing for things like bias and representativeness, inclusiveness, sharing that data with adopters so they know where they stand, with decision makers like HTA bodies that need to know, do I license it for my health system or not? But actually perhaps also reflecting bias profiles, maybe in an aggregated way, back to populations and say, hey, when we look at the data sets that we are building up at the multi-million level, we see biases, we see missing people in our data. Some of you out there, you're opting out, and maybe we need to help you to feel more confident about opting in. But if you opt out, you're kind of, the systems that are developed, the AI that's developed, the drugs and the vaccines might not work so well for you because your data wasn't part of how we developed it. And I think having a more transparent dialogue, not only with AI adopters and decision makers, but with the public is really important.
Thank you. There is a concept that is emerging. I do not know if you have heard. It's about evidence-informed deliberative frameworks, because we do have the tools not to have, let's say, just consultations passively, but to go into deliberation. And you said something very important. You talked about population groups. So sometimes it could be an individual exchange with a member of a vulnerable group or underserved or underrepresented population, but there may be need to broker dialogue at stakeholder level with a different group of people. And there, I think also there is another dimension for global data exchange. We have also in the trial setting, bridging trials and so on. It could be an opportunity for this type of deliberation to go a little bit global in terms of mechanisms to safeguard data quality and also AI trustworthiness, naturally. So a second and perhaps final question to you, and please feel free to differentiate you, Emmanuel, from the perspective of multi-activities and seeing what the hub could deliver, and you, Deepa, from the perspective of making quality an integral part in processes rather than one-off ticking box, let's say. What do you think would be, let's say, I know it sounds a very standard, but what do you think would be the one element that could be a catalyst at the moment in terms of global exchanges for Europe to come together, let's say, not only with Middle East or Asia, but globally, to come together and allow faster, higher quality data exchange with more relevance for cross-border care? And to this effect, how fast do you think it would be possible to implement such an agreement or framework or any other tool that you have in mind?
Please, Deepak.
Oh, okay. I was going to let you go first. Okay. I think we have to meet the AI developers halfway. You know, I've indicated the importance of developers being transparent about quality and the biases that they will discover. There will be no bias-free data. So it's not about saying, trust me, my data is shiny and beautiful and reflects the sunlight. It's about saying, here are the strengths and weaknesses of my data. People downstream from me will need to be aware of that as plus points and minus points in when and where you use it. But developers are themselves struggling to get hold of data. And, as health systems, they're not counting Emmanuel with this massive hub who is making data available. So, Emmanuel, I'm not telling you off. You're a hero in this. But many, many health systems today still provide loads of barriers that make it really hard for developers to get hold of data sets that are representative and are fine-grained and detailed. So they are sometimes forced to go to claims databases and less representative data sets because that's what they can get. And I think health systems can complain about the lack of representativeness and applicability all they like, but they have to do something about it themselves. So to me, health systems who want to adopt AI that really works for their patients need to meet the developers halfway and help them to gain access to the data that they can actually develop AI that works.
Lovely. So you're talking about a different policy and regulatory framework overall, or not even
framework. But maybe even a culture change.
I mean,
none of this, nasty profiteering industry who takes our data and makes lots of money. This is what I hear. We've got to really block all of that rubbish talk and start talking about a partnership relationship where the data is the enabler.
Some sort of categorization of bias rather than excluding all types or expecting. And Emmanuel, please, and feel free to diverge us as far as possible or stick as much as possible if it helps.
Thank you.
You said something very important for me at some point, because I hear more data as well, particularly in the context of discussing federated infrastructure. You said, of course, we don't pull in all data. We select what we pull into the hub. So perhaps you want to expand there. I think that's critical in some cases.
Many things to say. Yes, of course, I agree with all what Deepak said, and every database is biased. Okay, so this is clear. Even like our claim database in France, it's biased because there are only French people. Basically, it's mostly French people, so it's a bias, and it's impossible to create a database that is not biased. Now, of course, we are trying to be as unbiased as possible. Quality. Of course, we are talking about big data, but we all know that it's not about how big the data is. But a small, high-quality data is much better than a very big, very poor quality data. So there are all conditions of that, but it's good to say it again out loud. Now, there are several ways to work on. Several actions. So either we gather data from a lot of different countries to have like databases that are representing different countries and so on, or we set up some validation databases in each of the countries, and then we build up something in one country and we test it in other countries. This is, of course, in terms of regulation, it is much easier because you don't transfer data and so on. And this is something that can be globally organized. We could imagine having global association that is giving the rules for this building up validation data set. So then the algorithms would just enter the country, but will never go out of the country. So the only scores would go out of the country. So it would be kind of not that too hard in terms of regulation. Now, in order to put some incentive for people to share the data and at a global level, I think we had I'm going to say something very simple, but I think we have to run some use cases that are success stories. We have to show to people that we can do things by doing that. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do with India now with the project I told you about. Yes. This is insane. We are not able in Europe to transfer data from one country to another. And we are about to transfer some Indian data to France. which is, and that's why the European Commission is so interested, because it could be, they say, oh, this is an example of something that can be done. And so I hope so. I have to select the use cases very wisely so that they are real short time success stories. So on simple questions, we're not going to do very high level AI or stuff like that. I'm always used to say, when we're talking about revolution of AI, I always say, the revolution is about data, first of all. And once we have good data, we have a major impact on health, on public health, without AI. First of all, without AI, we can do so many things. Then with AI on the shelves, and then with the new methodological AI, like state of the art and so on. But there are so many things to do with simple tools, as long as we had the good data. That's the secret of it.
Lovely.
Well said.
We all, yes, I think we're all in agreement in these aspects. There are two hands. One is from Osama Al Hassan, please. And then I come to Isan Sagar.
Hello,
Osama?
thank you very much for this. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Yes,
Please,
okay.
thank you.
Thank you very much. So, thank you very much for hosting this great event and those interesting couple of lectures. My question is, do you think that we would be able soon to have some sort of like a digital maturity model for data quality for using healthcare for secondary use? Is it this possible, or is there any existing instrument like this? Thank you.
I think we're very close, personally. Yeah, I think we're close to having. Look, we've got to consider that for a lot of things in life, there is quality is partly in the data, but it's partly in the organizational processes and checks. So we are very close to being able to define both. Our challenge will be scaling it up. Of course, we're adding a burden, and nobody wants a burden. So I think we have to make sure that we can fund appropriately the investments needed to scale up, making it normal and routine and daily practice to do this. But are we able to invent how to do it? Yeah, I think we're almost there.
Thanks. I don't know, Emmanuel, if you want to add to this question.
No, I mean, I totally agree, and I wouldn't add anything.
I would say that that's a hidden cost because the systems are overburdened. So I think the challenge is not whether we can or whether we will, but okay. And second question, there was a second hand. Nishan Sagar, thank you.
Hi,
Please.
everyone. Good afternoon from India, and it was a wonderful presentation. And thanks to the organizers as well. So I would like to add something, or it's an indirect question also. So we all are talking about the data and the AI, and definitely the multiple analytics we can do for the larger good. But how we are going to generate this data is very important. So definitely the quality data I'm talking about, and without incorporating the public hospitals, public sector, we cannot get wealth of data, because the most of the people, again, if I will talk about the India or the South Asian country, East Asian countries, so it's a huge, like India is having around 1.4 billion population. So yeah, so trillion, sorry, yeah. So now the point is that how we are going to incorporate, how we are going to create a digital public infrastructure for this data analytics, AI, and data generation. And how can we add the clinicians, the consultants sitting at the government hospitals, the public hospitals, how can they adopt? So adoption is the basic thing. I think this is the basic thing where we should work, because we can create a platform, we can make a ML engines or AI, we can build on the data. But how we can add data and wealth of data we are having in the public system, and still the public system is working on the paper system. It's a hard copy system. Someone is coming and they're writing the prescription. So how we are going to implement such type of HMIS solution, clinical decision support system into the public hospitals, then only I believe we will have a wealth of data where we can do modeling and the forecasting and everything. So that was the small addition I wanted to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Nishan. Who would like to go first?
I can
Emmanuel?
start, yeah, because this is something we're starting in France. So we work with a lot of hospitals already, and I think you have to the hospital is interested in building a data warehouse. This is important for them because they know that their data is very valuable and they want to conduct research, so they need the infrastructure. Now, generally, I don't know how it is in India, but in France, they don't have money to do so. It's very hard. So the incentive is for the government to give money to do so, but as a counterpart, they would have to share a certain perimeter of data that would be interoperable between the different hospitals and that could be uploaded to a centralized platform. I think that's the right way to do it. But it's a very subtle equilibrium because you don't want to steal the data from the hospital. Okay, even though like the European Health Data Space says that all the data are required to be shared, so we are talking about data from hospitals also, of course, but it's not regulation that will solve the problem. It's not. You also have to have the data holders to be willing to do so, because otherwise it's not going to work. If you have a data holders that share the data, but actually they don't want to do it, if they are forced, it's not going to work. So they have to have their own interest of doing so. So you have to understand what is the right equilibrium and to be very careful about that. It's subtle, but this is something that we have been starting in France. I'm not saying like it's a big success and everybody wants to share data. There are some, there are some struggles, and we understand each other. These are very different ecosystems, and we have to understand what is the interest of each party.
Great. So last thing. So why I raise this question, because in India, my organization where I work is implementing the India's largest digital health program, which is one of the state is known as Bihar, and that there we are getting around 1.25 lakh OPD consultation every day digitally. They are doing, the consultants are doing. So now we are building the system for such type of robust system. We are building where you can put our AI engines or machine learning or whatever, and then you can create the evidences and the forecasting models, let's say supply chain, disease burden, heat maps, anything for at least for the particular state.
Right.
So how can we replicate not only in the India, in the South East Asian countries or anywhere in the world? So that's the basic thing actually. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I'm sure we have a lot to learn from India. I mean, that's what we are doing, the transfer of data we're doing from India. We are using a framework that was developed by India. So, I think that Europe has a lot to learn about other.
I don't know if I can chip in, but I can tell you that in terms of age, because I was in India in last spring, and I also saw what they were doing in different, because it's not federal country per se, but there's very high heterogeneity in the approaches between the different countries. And they were already doing small things, but interesting things in terms of assessing new technologies and exploring what they could do for data collection, because it's extremely challenging. I don't think the challenges in India are different, let's say, than remote or rural Europe. The challenges are very similar. Maybe the scale is different, but India has also some opportunities because there has been a lot of enthusiasm in technological development and proportionately a lot of investment. So I think the challenge perhaps could be in how to say that you start to work between the different provinces, if you like, and to what extent best practices, let's say, can be carried over. I hope that we perhaps, I don't know, not today, but perhaps we can bring some of the things that are happening down in terms of access for medical devices. So what we have seen, let's say, already from the few cases that have reached us from health technology assessment point. But I have to say that what I have seen that was very interesting was not only for hospitals, was also aspects in terms of reimbursement, aspects in terms of payments, aspects in terms of innovation on the primary care sector, from algorithms to triangulate patients in triaging. So perhaps we will see more of that. I don't know, Deepak, if you want to add to this particular question.
Yeah,
because you
well,
have
maybe
you are more,
I could just take it in a slightly different direction. I mean, Nishant has put his finger on the pulse of the most challenging question in data quality, and he put it very well. And I think Emmanuel's answer is also excellent, but to me it's one side of the coin. It's the top-down side of the coin, where we say, let us redefine health data as a kind of public good. Let's invest in it collectively at a country or multi-country level, and then help everybody to have good data, but with an obligation to make it more shareable as a consequence. But there's also a really important turn the coin over the bottom up. What is going to make a busy clinician who's in a hurry trying to deal with an overload of patients take effort in their data entry? And the answer has to be that we have to make sure that better data on one or a small number of patients delivers value back in near to real time. If it's not real-time gratification, it won't work, to the clinician. Things like decision support, things like workflow support, things like automated tools that help the clinician's busy day become less busy. Unless we can make sure our EHR systems are delivering on the ground, near to patient, near to clinician value from better data, the busy people will not invest. Even if you incentivize a hospital, how does the CEO of a hospital incentivize all their junior doctors and nurses in the middle of the night when they're tired to enter good data? Unless the systems give them return on effort almost immediately, it's not going to happen. And we have collectively, I would say globally, underestimated and underinvested in that micro value chain. Most clinicians don't have systems today to deliver that.
Thanks. And I think in an activity we did last September with the ministry in Austria, I was very surprised to hear GPs across Austria complain about the fact they had to enter the same data in 2 or 3 different databases, and they were not
there's
seeing
an
value.
example.
And their Turkish colleagues that were visiting Austria were echoing this. So that's why I said to some extent the challenges are similar, but also very important. And this is for implementation research more broadly and also for scaling up. We very often miss the human factor or the behavioral aspects. So I keep incentivize, but also motivate people with concrete direct effect benefit. I think there's another hand. I could be wrong.
Elena, just mindful of time. We are going to have now a block of presentations, and Javier Quiles is already on the line.
Please,
we then
please,
can continue the conversation.
Javier, please.
So Javier is already here with us. I'm going to bring him to the.
Okay. Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Please, Paul, would you like to introduce Javier? Hello, Javier.
Hello.
You can do it, Elena, if you like. I mean. Or maybe Javier can also introduce himself.
No, but Javier Quiles and I think the Agomalias have already presented many times before on a critical topic. So Javier, perhaps if you like to briefly present yourself and move forward with the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so then in terms of presentation, I'm going to share my screen. Can you please confirm you're seeing my screen? You can hear me well.
We can see your screen, and yes, we can.
Okay, I'm gonna try.
We can hear you well. Thank you.
Perfect. So, good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening. I know I'm aware there are different time zones. Thanks for hosting me today for this talk. My name is Javier Quiles. I'm Associate Director for the Bioinformatics team at M42. My background is in academia, in biotechnology, and then I spent over 10 years in academia, and then I moved to industry, first for a consulting company that was providing bioinformatics support to biotech and pharma, especially in the drug discovery and drug repurposing space. And then about 5 years ago, I was recruited by what it was back then, G42 Healthcare, which was the company that was tasked by the UAE government to conduct and implement the Emirati Genome Program. And then 2 or 3 years later, it was migrated or merged with Mubadala Health, which runs certain hospitals into M42. So that's why now today I'm representing M42. So as you can see from my slide, and I have briefly introduced with the multi-genome program. So the topic of the talk is to how we are working with national genomics and real-world data, and more importantly, from strategy or theory to practical implementation and clinical readiness. So yeah, so because it, as per the title, from strategy and clinical readiness, for the next slides, hopefully I can walk you through this journey that we have taken. So starting with the strategy, as I was saying, so in 2020, the UAE had the vision to initiate a national genome sequencing program, similar to the ones that are happening more and more in the world, like the UK Biobank, in the UK, the all of us in the United States, but also Estonia, Singapore, and many others that I don't want to miss. So the goal was clear. In the UAE, there are around 10 million people, but they're relatively small compared to other countries. Proportion of those are nationals, so it's about 1 million. And the goal was to sequence them all. Not only sequence the genome, but also that genomic data is linked to the phenotypic data, which we call as pheno-EGP, which is extracted from Malafi, which is the region's health information exchange platform. So 5 years later, which is pretty impressive, so 80% of that target has been sequenced, which is very impressive if you compare that other programs devoted considerable amount of time to planning and execution. So that was like really fast. And one advantage is when you think about the UK Biobank and all of us, these are like fantastic programs. But I think two main differences are there. One is that obviously sequencing 500,000 or 1 million in the US or UK, it's massive, but it still represents probably less than 5% of the population. While here you are effectively covering the whole population, at least the national one. And two is that all of us and UK Biobank, although clearly they have translated into impactful research and probably many spin-offs, but the vision of those programs was more to foster research, and they didn't have any position when it comes to clinical implementation. And I think the EGP it has a clear mandate to be implemented into the clinic. So that means that the EGP, by definition, and because of the coverage of the population, is enabling or aims to enable nationwide programs using genomics. That when it comes to the strategy, but obviously that was the plan, and how you implement that is what I will try to go next. So for that, obviously, no surprise, you need the correct analysis workflows. For operational reasons, the EGP used 3 different sequencing technologies. The reason was to move faster on those. It has posed certain challenges because, as I'm writing there, we needed different analysis workflows for each of those 3 technologies. In the end, it has also been very useful because it allows you to certain replication and quality control purposes. Some technologies will maybe bring you the clinical grade acceptance from the community. Others will bring you, like Oxford Nanopore, will bring you the long read that allows you to tackle certain parts of the genome that are more challenging, and also brings you methylation. So all in all, even if the 3 platforms were selected because of operational reasons, selecting those have had certain advantages, scientifically speaking. So, but as I was saying, so that when in implementation, especially during 2020, 2021, that means that we had to put together these pipelines. This is like an old picture from 2023 because certain changes we have updated since then. I'm not trying to go through the details of those pipelines unless someone wants to do that. But the idea is that here, so for the 3 platform sequencing technologies, namely Lumina, MGI, Nanopore, we had to implement those workflows because obviously we wanted to have the same endpoints in terms of genetic variation characterized for all 3 platforms, because otherwise there would be like an inequity in terms of participants, right? We want them all to have the same sort of genetic information. And to do that, we had to implement it, for instance, Illumina, it's more advanced in terms of software analysis, so it was more off the shelf. While for the other one, there was a lot of internal development to set up those pipelines in a mixture of on-premise and on cloud, as we are showing in this picture. By the way, we put together this into a series of white papers that we share with our stakeholders internally and with the government. And this work was published in ACAG in 2024 as a poster. So this is public information whatsoever. So, okay, you need to have like analysis workflows that are adapted to those technologies, that are scalable and cost optimized, because you need to do it in relatively short time, especially if you want to bring the genomics to the clinic. But obviously, it needs to bring or deliver high quality data. And I think that our work on achieving that went in 2 directions. One is certainly there's work in genomics in defining what a good genomics data is and what it's not, but still the fact that we had 3 platforms, the fact that we had different chemistries over the years, and that we had 3 platforms implied that we needed to establish criteria, as other programs have done, and all of us and UK Biobank. And certainly we learn a lot of their findings, but at the end of the day, when you run your program, you have your DNA, so you know your collection process, you know your DNA extraction process, you have your sequencing, and you need to a little bit tailor those metrics to your data, and that's what we did. And also make sure that when you benchmark those workflows with reference data, you're getting the accuracy that you're expecting. So in line with the first one, so getting high quality whole genome sequencing data, obviously it's not the goal to go through all these plots and what they mean. What I want to illustrate here is that for many metrics that the community is using to define high quality samples, we implemented them, and where we felt that others needed to be added, that's what we did. And this is a kind of a cartoonish way to illustrate that if you were to set that dashed red line as a cutoff, we in all cases, or in like virtually all cases, or in a big proportion of them, we were getting the quality, which was very reassuring, and obviously the foundation for the downstream analysis. Again, this was consolidated into a series of white papers that we are using for different stakeholders, and this work was also published in the American Society of Human Genetics Conference in 2024. Going to the accurate, so obviously you could have raw good quality data, but still you want to make sure that you are getting the data that you are expecting to get. And that's what we have done in a series of benchmark using reference data, right? So essentially what we did is, I don't know if you're familiar with the Coriell Institute. The Coriell Institute, they have like a bunch of samples that are very well characterized. So not only you can order those DNA or the cell lines, but also you will know the truth set, so that you can then purchase the cell line or the DNA, you run it in your end-to-end workflow, considering DNA extraction, sequencing, and the data analysis, and then you can benchmark against those truth sets. And then you can compare, and that's the way that you can, using for instance, the accreditation for the CAP or the CLIA, etc. You get these accreditations, but also scientifically you have the reassurance of the accuracy of your pipelines. Again, not planning to go through that plot unless anyone wants, but what you have on the x-axis is like a bunch of performance metrics across the different platforms that we're using and in different parts of the genome. And in the y-axis you have the value of those metrics, right? So as you can imagine, the closer to 1, the better. And that's what we are getting across the different platforms. Obviously, there are certain variation, but bear in mind that in all cases, we are getting, at least for SNVs, which are changes in a single letter into the genome, we're getting performance metrics above 95%. Indels are changes in more than 1 letter. They are equally important, but we know as a community that they are more challenging. That's why you are seeing slightly lower performance, especially for the oxford nanopore, which is something known, and we see how there's certain improvements when you look at the exons, which are the part of the genome that are coding proteins that are more relevant clinically speaking, or at least is for those that we know more. So bottom line, oxford nanopore is improving in those regions with the new chemistries. And again, this is something that we first published in medRxiv, which is like a preprint server, and now it's been accepted in Genome Research, so it will be publicly available with more details pretty soon. I think it's in the March issue. So this is for known variants across the genome, but we also, as part of this same work, we look at specific mutations that are known to cause certain disease like breast cancer, cystic fibrosis, and what you can see is that across the different platforms we're able to detect them, and that was really reassuring to ensuring that we have highly accurate pipelines. What I was showing you before was genome-wide, but we have done another benchmarks. For instance, if you look at HLA, which is this part of the genome on chromosome 6, which is highly polymorphic, which is part of the reason why it's complex to resolve through standard molecular techniques. But at the same time, that polymorphism is crucial biologically because it means it's involved in immunology, and this region, while complex to resolve, is also very relevant for disease risk and transplant success. So we had this question on whether using those whole genome sequencing data sets would be able to accurately profile that region in individuals from the Emirati Genome Program. And again, I'm not planning to go into the detail, but what you can do in the bottom is that when you look across the whole region, you have high accuracy rates across the different platforms in the different colors. And also when you look at the specific genes in that region, we are also achieving high accuracy rates, a bit lower in certain genes that are known to be particularly challenging. Sorry, I'm admitting someone into the talk. And the same thing for other set of genes which are relevant for pharmacogenomics. I'll talk a little bit more later, but the sense is that we knew that those genes were important for some projects that we wanted to do. So we did the same thing. We ordered certain correlative samples for which we know the truth sets. We run them all through our end-to-end workflow, from DNA extraction to sequencing to analysis with the different platforms. And we were benchmarking the results that we were getting against the truth set. And as you can see from the height of the bars that range from 0 to 100%, we're getting high precision and concordance values. So we had a clear strategy, scalable analysis workflows, high quality data. So what's happening is that over those 5 years, right? So genomics data is being generated almost every day, right? Because we keep enrolling participants, we keep sequencing them, and then we keep generating data. Funny enough, the enrollment and the sequencing happens faster than the actual data processing. So we have this constant when we update the numbers to management. So they look at the numbers of people enrolled and they expect immediately the same thing to be already ready for analysis or for downstream analysis. And we need to explain why we need some time for processing. So the practical implications of that is that when you are running, let's say, clinical genomics applications, for instance, newborn screening or premarital screening, certainly the moment you have the genomics data, as soon as you have it, it is okay, and it's a must that you process that data, right? Because you need to deliver the information within days or weeks, because you have some turnaround times by contract or because that's critically important for the patient. But when you are looking at more population scale analysis, like, I don't know, like genome-wide association studies, genomic screening programs to inform public health policies, I think it's not practical to do it on the fly and keep updating those type of analysis on a weekly or even monthly basis, right? And I think that this is not something that we have learned ourselves, but this is, if you look at those programs like UK Biobank, all of us, or probably many others, they were what they call like data freezes, that every certain period of time, or when they reach a milestone in terms of numbers, they say, okay, we are going to freeze this data set, whatever number it is, and if tomorrow I have another 100 samples, those will go to the next data freeze. So that's what we have been doing quite organically, and now we have formalized the process a little bit more. So when we started the first QC analysis, it was probably around 80,000. Then we doubled that number. The first more stable or formal data freeze that we had was 500,000, and then more recently, we are now working on a data freeze comprising 700,000. But that gap that I was referring to before, right? So we struggle, or we have to be very pedagogical in explaining why, if now we have already 800,000 sequence, as I was saying before, we're still analyzing 700,000, right? So people are eager to include that delta of 100,000, but we need to start the analysis as opposed to keep working on updating those data freezes. So yeah, many of the things that I will refer to now are with the 500,000, but we are updating the studies to 700,000. So so I think by now, hopefully, I have convinced you about how we have gone through the journey from strategy to clinical readiness. So I guess that you will begin to know, okay, now that we are ready, well, what can you do with that? So I will hopefully show you three use cases that in which we are using those data sets and those pipelines for clinical applications. So what we did is at M42, as I was saying, there was a merge. So now we have access to hospitals and clinicians. So in a quite organic manner, we identify clinicians that were like genomics savvy. They wanted to start using those genomics data sets into their daily operations or research or applications. So, and we have been working for the last few years very closely with them to try to first conduct some translational research that later we can run pilots and eventually implement it to the clinic. The first use case is on inherited retinal disease, or IRD for short. This is with Dr. Arif Khan at Cleveland Clinic, Abu Dhabi. So what is the clinical need here? So those IRD diseases, which are a set of diseases, roughly 200 or so, are very heterogeneous when it comes into the phenotype, meaning the clinical presentation for the clinician, but also when you try to identify the genes, there are different genes, and some genetic variants will cause disease, some others will not. And as a proof of that, there are around over 80,000 genetic variants within 300 genes that have been associated with IRD, and yet only around 2% of those have demonstrated penetrance. And here, penetrance being defined as, okay, if I have a certain genetic variant, or if I have a cohort of people that do have that genetic variant that I know, or that it has been reported to confer risk to IRD, how many of those actually do develop the disease? That's the concept of called penetrance. And very often we think that when we talk about genetic variants predisposing, we are mentally primed to think that is going to be close to 100%, and to 100%. And the reality is that for many disease, unfortunately, it's probably in the lower end. But that's particularly severe for IRD, and particularly severe also for non-European populations, because as you might know, and it might have been discussed, many of our genomic studies, if not medical studies, have been conducted over the last century or so on European descent populations. So that has created a bias, and that's why I see a raised hand. Happy to answer now if it's a question, or more towards the end, as is advised by the.
Hello, this is Osama from Dubai Health Authority. So my question to you, what's your strategy with regard to epigenetics, not genetics? So do you have any use cases that you are running now around epigenetics?
So in this presentation, I do not. I did not select anything on epigenetics on purpose, because I wanted to show you, one, examples that were closer to an end in terms of, and I had more concrete data, and two is because it's clinical. That said, one of the sequencing technologies that we use, which is Oxford Nanopore, when you do the sequence of the genome, it will also give you for free, so to speak, methylation profile. So we are using that methylation data in different ways. little is known about methylation at population scale or at this scale, because methylation is not so. I mean, only now with nanopore you can conduct methylation at that scale and combine it with the genomics data. So our first goal with the methylation data, trying to answer your question, is to create like a map of methylation variation across the population and across age, and use that for subsequent studies. One could be trying to identify aging clocks, because methylation has been correlated with your biological age, but also trying to identify how methylation modulates disease risk in certain cases. I don't know if that answers your question, but unfortunately, in this presentation, I do not have anything on methylation.
Thank you.
So as I was saying, and that's not only for IRD, but for many diseases, really, there's like a gap between what we know in terms of genetics in European populations and non-European, as it is the case of the Arabs in the UAE. So what we did is we used these 500,000 genomes. Remember what I was talking about, the data freezes. We combined them with the electronic health records that we had for them. Using the genetic data alone, we were able to reconstruct the families, and then we also use external information from public databases like Climber. So again, I'm not trying to dissect all this plot, but what you're seeing here is different genes in the x-axis that have been associated with retinal disease. And here, penetrance is the concept I mentioned you, like what proportion of people having a certain variant, each dot is a variant, by the way, what proportion of people having that genetic variant that has been associated with a phenotype, in this case, retinal disease, actually do show that disease. And that you can see that in the lines of what we're seeing, it's not that they are close to 100%, but they are close on very modest variants, which is fine as long as we are aware of that. And by doing that across a big population with linked medical records and across many genes, what we were able to do is be able to classify those variants into tiers. And we think that here is where are the clinical information that is useful, because then I think public health regulators or clinicians can use that information, and maybe, I don't know, variants that are in the tier 1 can be clearly used for clinical screening, while maybe variants in the tier 7, even if they are in ClinVar or in any other known database, maybe our data is supporting that it's not very worth screening those, at least in the Arab ancestry. And that's what we are doing, like as I show here, like 36 variants that we are raising the flag for not being used at all, while we have close to 100 variants that with very high penetrance, and we believe that should be taken more with higher importance. And that's the way through which we identify certain families that we are reporting. This is published, by the way, in the American Society of Human Genetics. But the clinical implication is that then you could use that to stratify people to explain the phenotypes that you are seeing in case that they also have vision loss, or those that do not have vision loss, but that you foresee that might have it in the future, they can be enrolled into prevention programs. So the second use case is on breast cancer. So this is a collaboration again with CCAD, this time with Dr. Stephen Grobmeyer and Fawad Khan. Here, the clinical need, again, is along the lines of very high-risk variants. You might know, like BRCA1, BRCA2. We know all these genes, and yet variants in these known genes will explain around 10% of cases. And again, likely an overestimate in non-European populations like in the Gulf. And more recently, there is this new concept, new in the sense of people starting to use it into the clinical practice, which is polygenic risk scores, which is how you are not then screening multiple variants, but considering a hit as a risk conferring only, but you are aggregating the moderate risk of tens, if not hundreds of variants, and then you are having a score for each person, right? One of the reasons why people, at least in the clinic, are not using polygenic risk scores is because there is this idea of, for instance, if you are developing a model, a PRS model into a European population, that might not be translating well into other populations. So again, this idea that I think is maybe one of the messages that we need more research in non-European populations. So what we did is that we took the two approaches, screening the population for known variants, and this way we were able to identify usual suspects in BRCA1 and BRCA2 that clearly had a big impact in the survival rate of Emirati women with breast cancer. But also we look into the PRSs, right? And what we did is, instead of creating our PRS for the Emirati population, we took one that existed that has 313 markers that had been developed in European populations but validated in many others. And what we are seeing is that it works as well as in the population in which it was developed. So that was very reassuring. So once we were confident in using that, that's what we did. We applied to our cohort. And what we see is that it works. So you can see how those women that are predicted to be in the top 10 risk for breast cancer, certainly they have an earlier risk to develop, a 10-year risk to develop breast cancer, and that they reach the same risk a decade earlier, as you can see in this plot. The last use case is on pharmacogenomics. As I promised, I would talk more about it before. This is with another doctor at CCAD, Dr. Sebi John. Here, the clinical need, and I will be using clopidogrel, which is commercialized under the name Plavix, but there are many other genes and conditions or drugs in which you see the same effect. The problem is the following. So if you are prescribed with Plavix, there's probably like a relatively standard dose that you're going to be given based on maybe gender, age, and weight maximum, or severity of your clinical presentation. But the reality is that the genetic variation in genes that metabolize clopidogrel or any other drug really is going to influence your response to that drug. And this has the two sides of the coin, right? So if you're given a standard dose and you are able to metabolize the drug very quickly, then the drug is not going to be effective in you, and that has implications because then it might not be able to prevent what it tries to prevent, like it is the case of clopidogrel, which is used to prevent cardiovascular problems as a treatment for a stroke. And then also it has a financial cost because then you'll be prescribed like a drug, a certain dose, it will not be effective, you will have to go again to the doctor, be given a higher dose, right? And that has a financial or cost implication. On the other side of the coin, if you are given the default and your liver is very poorly metabolizing that drug is going to be longer in your body, and then you might have like adverse events, right? And this is a fact. There's like by now evidence of how people that have certain genetic background, they are not going to be responding well to clopidogrel, and that's particularly severe in the Middle East, where 41% of people are known to be hyperresponsiveness, meaning that they are at risk of having adverse effects, right? So by now there's like supporting evidence that people with certain loss of function alleles, meaning that the drug is not that gene is not working properly in their body, so meaning that they are not gonna be able to clear out that drug, so they should not be given that drug at all, because one, it's not gonna try to prevent the stroke, but plus it's gonna be able to, or it could lead to adverse effects. So in a nutshell, that's what we are trying to do. So we are going to characterize this cohort of 500,000 or 700,000 individuals. We're trying to identify which ones are poor metabolizers, which ones are like fast metabolizer or intermediate categories that exist. And then we are trying to assign them into recommendations when it comes into clopidogrel treatment. And as you can imagine, as long as you know well the genetics of certain drug response, you could extend that to other drugs and conditions. So This is my last slide, so hopefully I'm convinced, I have convinced you during this time about the journey from strategy to clinical readiness and how we are trying to implement this clinical readiness. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will leave that slide before I give the floor for any question that might have the audience.
Thank you very much, Xavier. I don't know if there are any questions from the floor. I just would like to make one comment. I think for those of us that are closer to home, this may be very easy, but maybe not for everyone. So just to say that in the last 2-3 slides, we went one step further with a CYP2C9. So basically, it's an enzyme that it's showing, you know, how well or how fast or how slow you metabolize a particular medicine. And of course, this may lead to a wide array, as you said, and as we could see on the slide, in terms of side events or adverse effects, how many visits you need to go, what you experience as a patient, the cost to the system, and so on. So thank you for introducing this aspect, because it touches upon both pharmacovigilance, which I think we will touch upon in the afternoon, but also in pharmacogenomics, and also in point of care testing, in different types of testing, and also catching quickly through the system cases which might prove, let's say, even fatal or definitely adverse outcomes. And going a little bit more, yes, it's clinical readiness, but it's also health systems readiness or public health systems readiness. It's one extra layer, let us say. So thanks for these two examples. I don't see any questions up. I think in the interest of time, we will go to a block of UK case studies, and then we can have the opportunity for all of us to discuss, including with a quite wonderful cohort we have just seen. So Panos Kefalas is the next speaker, and he has a very long experience in market access, and I think also much closer to home for me in reimbursement and HTA and so on. And he is leading as director for the Catapult, which is a UK initiative for what is becoming more and more and well-known acronym, but for those that may not have come across it, ATMPs are new products, new medicinal products, advanced medicines, which are not always necessarily tablets or capsules, but could be cells and genes and many other things, or transformative molecules. And I think we will hear quite interesting things in terms of real-world evidence and data. So Panos, please feel free to add in terms of presentation, and thank you for being with us.
Great, thank you very much, Elena. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. We'll start my presentation briefly by introducing the cell and gene therapy catapult, and then I will move into the subject of how real-world evidence can help address evidence requirements for ATMPs. Right, so the Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult is a UK-based not-for-profit organization, and our purpose is to facilitate the growth of the cell and gene therapy industry. And we, in the subsequent slides, I'm using the term ATMP that, as Elena explained, it stands for Advanced Therapy Medicinal Products. It's a regulatory term, and it covers cell and gene therapies and tissue engineered products. So in terms of what we do to facilitate the growth of the cell and gene therapy industry, we support the development of safe and efficacious therapies to deliver patient healthcare system and wider economic benefits, and we provide various relevant key capabilities, including scientific, clinical, regulatory, market access, but we also provide infrastructure for analytical, process development, and manufacturing. And these are very important areas because a key concern with ATMPs is the very high manufacturing costs, which create downstream challenges for developers as well as for healthcare systems, because they typically launch with very high target prices, ambitions for these products to be reimbursed at very high price levels. In parallel, we drive environmental shaping initiatives in the UK, which help to optimize translational processes, regulatory and commissioning frameworks for cell and gene therapy specifically, and we also participate in relevant international initiatives. So now moving to the ATMP specific slides. So due to their high manufacturing and delivery costs, ATMPs present cost effectiveness and budget impact challenges. And because these tend to be lower in indications of very high unmet need and with very small patient populations, these indications have attracted most of the ATMP development activity. And in order to have a commercially viable proposition, developers need to secure both commercially viable profit margins and return on investment. And therefore, what is essential here is first to make sure that the ATMP they're developing is delivering significant patient and healthcare system benefits over and above existing therapeutic alternatives. And secondly, every effort needs to be made to minimize the manufacturing and delivery costs of these therapies. Now, because of the nature of the indications that can support ATMP development and commercialization, ATMPs face numerous challenges in terms of evidence generation, and these relate both to the shorter term horizon that is typically covered by the clinical trial observation period, as well as the longer term horizon beyond the data available at the time of launch. But such data is needed in order to support claims of sustainability of effect, as well as the ambition that we often hear about these products to demonstrate that they're curative. So the concerns of over the evidence available from clinical trials vary, but tend to include the absence of the comparator arm and therefore reliance on lower quality indirect comparisons. This is because the patient populations are too small, or it is to be able to accommodate randomization or additional treatment arms, or there may be ethical considerations. And as a result, very small recruited to the trial patient sizes tend to limit statistical significance of the findings, even in the short-term horizon. Now, we're not talking about the long-term horizon yet around, sustainability of effect. There are also challenges with outcomes selected, especially if these are surrogate and are not well validated and correlated to hard outcomes, and because some of the ATMPs target very rare conditions that are not well characterized, it can be challenging to include well validated outcomes for those patient populations. But last but not least, the available evidence at launch is further limited when a therapy in development qualifies for accelerated regulatory pathways, which is not uncommon for ATMPs given the high unmet need populations they target. Now, given the high manufacturing costs, which require high target prices for commercial viability, when there isn't sufficient evidence at the time of launch, the consequences of the decision uncertainty for payers and the healthcare system to having these therapies reimbursed, especially in publicly funded healthcare systems. There are different strategies to reduce uncertainty and manage its consequences. This can include one or more of the following, and I have grouped them here as pre-launch and post-launch strategies. So first, in the pre-launch setting, the use of external comparator arms that are leveraging real-world evidence can help address the absence of a comparator arm in the clinical trial design. And I will cover this in more detail in subsequent slides. Another approach is to aim to address evidence gaps by using data from analogous therapies in terms of genetic and or cellular mechanism of action, assuming that these analogous therapies have already launched and they have available evidence in the public domain. In other words, to leverage biological plausibility arguments. This is a term often used for this type of evidence. Another approach, again, in the pre-launch setting, is to plan and establish long-term follow-up data collection, not only for the pivotal trials, but also of the very early stage trials as from phase 1. And this would help maximize the pre-launch observation period. And at the same time, it will not compromise time to market, because you don't need to wait for longer to collect that information by relying on long-term follow-up of the pivotal trial. Now, moving on to the post-launch setting, outcomes-based reimbursement is a term often used, and yes, indeed, it can help address data uncertainty at the time of launch. However, willingness of healthcare systems to implement varies. This is because outcomes-based reimbursement presents increased burden, not only in terms of ongoing data collection, but also for administering payments accordingly. But at the same time, it's not just about the healthcare system, because outcomes-based reimbursement can present challenges for manufacturers if the full payments are delayed long-term, and especially for ATMPs that have very high manufacturing costs. Now, real-world evidence is key in addressing ATMP uncertainty at the time of launch, and I will share some examples of ATMPs that have leveraged real-world evidence to secure commissioning. It is often required by payers alongside long-term follow-ups of pivotal trials post-launch. And it is important to note that deviations are being observed between real-world evidence and clinical trial data, and in some cases, this have resulted in ATMPs not being able to secure long-term reimbursement, despite having secured initial reimbursement under coverage with evidence development frameworks. One of them is Kymriah and diffuse large B-cell lymphoma in England, where after a period of managed access, the arising evidence did not enable it to progress to routine commissioning. Therefore, strategies for real-world evidence collection post-launch are a key consideration in planning ATMP launches. They can include optimization of existing registries, creation of new ones, or alternative ways of capturing data from routine clinical practice. And again, I will cover this further in my very last slide. So when we look across the therapy development trajectory, reliance on real-world evidence is essential across all stages, especially for therapies like ATMPs and for the reasons that I've already mentioned. First, in planning for clinical development, real-world evidence can help define epidemiological parameters to inform development and the disease trajectory. It can help assess feasibility of recruiting target patient population and inform inclusion criteria. It can help determine whether the single-arm trial limitations can be surpassed by leveraging real-world evidence in order to substantiate credible comparative effectiveness claims. And also, it can help inform what outcomes should be measured as part of the clinical development program. Now, next, in preparation for filing for marketing authorization and health technology assessment, real-world evidence can help substantiate claims on unmet need, comparative safety and efficacy, and economic benefits. And finally, in the post-launch setting, real-world evidence helps establish long-term safety, efficacy, and economic arguments to inform post-launch reassessments, clinician and patient choice. And another point that is mentioned on this slide, and I think is important, it can also help generate insights on utilization patterns, and therefore it can highlight, it can surface issues related to NHS readiness to deliver, related to patient pathways and also geographical differences within a given country about access to therapies across populations in those geographies. Right. Real-world evidence guidelines specifically for external comparator arms are numerous, and all key adoption stakeholders are making an effort to cover the subject, which reflects a recognition of the need to leverage this type of evidence. Especially where patient populations are so small that prevent randomization, as well as where it is unethical to randomize. Again, not uncommon for patient populations being targeted by ATMPs. So in this example here, we're taking a closer look at how real-world evidence has supported regulatory and reimbursement decisions for Casgevy. That was developed through a single-arm trial that is called CLIMB 111, and it is marketed by Vertex. Casgevy has two indications. One is for beta thalassemia, and the other one is for sickle cell. Here we focus on beta thalassemia, but even when we refer to beta thalassemia, you can notice in the wording in this slide that the actual target population is more narrow than the broader beta thalassemia population based on the inclusion criteria for the trial. Casgevy has secured reimbursement in England through the managed access mechanism, which is a type of coverage with evidence development. And according to this mechanism, the therapy is reimbursed on the condition the data is collected over a 5-year period, so that is reassessed. There is a special ring-fenced fund for this type of access, which is called IMF and stands for Innovative Medicines Fund. And this is separate from the drug budgets used for routine commissioning. Given the data uncertainty at launch, EMA requested a post-authorization safety study, a PAS, evaluating the long-term safety and efficacy of Casgevy in treated patients. Data are now being collected over 15 years via 2 registries. The first one is the registry by the Center for International Blood and Marrow Transplant Research, and the second one is the European Society for Blood and Marrow Transplantation Registry, EBMT. When it comes to requirements for its managed access, a combination of both long-term follow-up data from the clinical trials as well as data from the PAS study have been requested. And this is the same PAS study that is being used for regulatory purposes. Additional data are requested, including utilization data captured in BlueTech. BlueTech is NHS England's management system for high-cost drugs, as well as data from the manufacturer Vertex, their management system for the orders that they have been receiving and processing. And all this data needs to be collected over 5 years so that the therapy can be reassessed at that point as to whether it qualifies for routine commissioning. Next, let's take a look at how real-world evidence generation has supported the reimbursement mechanisms of Kymriah and Yescarta across certain European healthcare systems. And this information applies to the time of the first launch. The different approaches have been used across healthcare systems for analyzing real-world evidence. On one hand, we have the cohort level approach. On the other hand, we have the individual patient level approach. The UK and France followed the cohort approach, which is also less administratively burdensome, but Italy and Spain and Germany followed the individual patient level approach that requires looking at individual patient performance and adjusting the payment mechanisms specifically for that patient, which overall creates more administrative burden. In the UK, conditional reimbursement was granted for 5 years through a similar mechanism to what I described for Casgevy earlier, subject to the generation of additional evidence via real-world evidence and long-term follow-ups of the clinical trials. The sources to capture real-world evidence was the registry called the Systemic Anti-Cancer Therapy Dataset, also known as SACT, as well as BlueTech for utilization data. A similar approach was followed in France, where the registry used for annual reassessment was the Lymphoma Academic Research Organization data platform, also known as LYSARC. In Italy, payments were split across 3 performance-based installments over 12 months. And it's important to highlight that for hematological cancers, a minimum of 3 years is typically needed to establish sustainable remission in the long term. Therefore, these healthcare systems that are willing to pay in full within anything less than that period are absorbing the longer term risk of patients relapsing beyond year 1. And this is also happened in Spain. Here they relied on a new real-world evidence platform at the time of the first CAR-T launches, which is called ValterMed, and this was developed specifically for collecting real-world evidence for promising innovative therapies with limited data at the time of launch, like the CAR-Ts. Finally, in Germany, the full price was reimbursed upfront for each patient treated, but the real-world evidence arising from following that patient long-term was subsequently used to inform whether a subsequent rebate should take place from the manufacturer back to the healthcare system to compensate them if the treatment failed in the long run. And this brings us to my last slide. And as I said earlier, I will briefly capture how existing real-world evidence infrastructure can be optimized to address the needs for this type of evidence by therapies in development, but also those launching. So we can improve existing therapy area registries and create new ones as innovative therapies in need for real-world evidence come to market. And this is something that has been happening organically. The second option is about creating a new real-world evidence infrastructure, and this requires a much larger investment. And we've seen this happening in Italy years ago when IFA created their IFA web-based tool to enable the so-called IFA registries to get operationalized initially for cancer, now for more wide use across therapy areas, and ValterMed in Spain. It's a similar concept where standalone platform is being developed that allows outcomes to be customized to accommodate launches across all therapy areas. Therefore, the data fields are flexible. However, the concern with this is that it would result in duplication of data entries and competition with existing registers, and some registers are very close to the heart of treating clinicians and healthcare systems. The third approach would be to create a digital solution for automating the capturing of data from routine clinical practice as a basis for automating how registries are created and updated, and therefore reducing that administrative burden associated with creating new registries and updating them. And also the solution to enable cross-linking with existing data sets to optimize data quality and address evidence gaps by pulling data from different sources. And such an initiative is currently running in the UK, and more information can be found on the link that I have included on the right-hand side of the slide. This initiative is called Aim for All. It is a collaborative effort between different UK stakeholders, including healthcare providers, the Digital Health and Innovation Centre, and the industry. And that brings us to the end of my presentation, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very, very much. I think this was quite wonderful because it provided a comprehensive overview of what you're doing and your own experiences, but also it showcased a little bit what we have been seeing the last 10 years in terms of ATMPs, with some nuance in other countries and for mandatory agreements. I do not see yet questions, but I do see, I don't know if he's still here. Yes, I see John Spurs is in the room from NICE. And as John is leading for commercial managed access and medicines policy, I don't know if you would like to comment or care to elaborate from that perspective before we go to John Lewis. So John Spurs first.
Sure. Well, Kalimera, Elena, good to see you. Sorry, my wife's Greek. So.
Panos is also, I think, partially. So it's a Greek screen.
No, Kalimera. Okay. Thanks for an excellent presentation, and it's good to see some familiar faces today. Paul invited me along. We had all sorts of issues with email filters in government, so apologies. So I can't stay for very long, but I thought it was a great, really great presentation, Panos. And I think John and Hannah are going to speak later. Me and Hannah recently spoke together at a sort of a conference in London. I think the one thing I'd say with ATMPs is, and it really builds on kind of what Panos was saying, is I think the pipeline is very exciting. I think we're seeing lots of new technologies coming to market. I loved your scales slide there, Panos. So I think that sums it up quite nicely, is that they've got large amounts of potential, but we've got a lot of data uncertainty, understandably. And also, unfortunately, in life generally, when things are more uncertain, you pay less for them, right? If you're buying a car doesn't have a full service history, you don't pay more, you pay less. But with ATMPs, we're seeing an increasing pricing expectations, and that might be linked to a number of things, potentially the large benefits that we see sustained over a long period of time. So you can kind of understand that to one point. But sitting here as a kind of evaluator and a former commissioner at NHS England, I'm sure Hannah and John will come onto this a bit, so I don't want to sort of preempt their presentation. But this kind of like snapshot in time makes things very, very challenging, because you've got this potential, but then you're kind of sat there going, but if I sink my cost into this and it doesn't perform, the opportunity cost of doing that, particularly, I think what's really important is, yes, ATMPs are being developed in areas where there are no therapeutic options, but we're also seeing areas, for example, like haemophilia B, where there are therapeutic options available. So it's not just the ATMP. So you're like, do you fund the ATMP or do you fund that? And then my sort of final point, and again, I'm not going to say too much, so I don't want to ruin John and Hannah's presentation, but you'll always hear me bang on about the patient journey. And again, that's where the evidence collection comes in. The patient journey and the shared decision making around gene therapy is so important. Really, really important. And I think whenever we think around data collection, people assume that it's a really straightforward thing. You know, Panos, you mentioned very well in your presentation the Innovative Medicines Fund. Now, we haven't utilised that a lot. And a lot of the reason is, this might sound a bit strange to people, but we actually actively try and persuade companies not to go into managed access if possible. And the reason for that is the data collection burden on patients and clinicians is quite high. And then I think linked to that, just final point for me, is if you think around outcomes-based pricing and you kind of think, well, if we collect this data, we can share the risk. Let me give you an example from haemophilia, right? So again, so that's what my PhD research is, so I know well. So you go, right, we're going to do a outcomes-based agreement on gene therapy in haemophilia. Okay, so the gene therapy, you give it, factor 9 levels shoot up, brilliant, everyone's happy, right? And you've agreed with the company that if it fails, so the factor levels drop below a certain level, they will pay back, or you'll have some sort of financial arrangement. So as the efficacy starts to wane, what if the patient goes, well, I'm an active patient and I'm a little bit worried about this, and actually I'd like some factor 9 to supplement my gene therapy because I'm worried that my factor levels are coming down. Now the company will rightfully say, well, hang on, that's not the agreed definition of failure that we had in our trial, right? And then the health system will go, well, we want to give this patient the factor 9 because obviously they've got an active lifestyle, we want to do that. So I guess what I'm trying to show in that example is what sounds like quite a straightforward agreement actually turns out to be quite complicated when you get into it. So hopefully that sort of comments builds on Panos's excellent presentation. And also, Elena, hopefully I haven't taken too much away from John and Hannah, who I know are going to be excellent. Thank you.
I don't think you have. Thank you very much. It's a good observation about a linear journey. Most patient journeys are not linear, of course, but there's a lot of discussion at the moment, regulatory, and I think many of us are involved in this in different capacities in patient experience data. What does it constitute, particularly if you have a patient journey which involves different steps, different jurisdictions, clinical components, but not only, and so on. So thanks for bringing that up. I think it's a good context, and thanks for being with us, even if only for a few minutes. Good context for yeah. If you can join back at the end, great. If not, but we'll definitely follow up. So now we have a dual presentation, let's say, which is coming from John and from Hannah. John Lewis is the head of the programs, and Hannah is the Advanced Therapies Outcomes Manager, but I think also she wears other hats in academia, and they will discuss a little bit more with us about how we address aspects of outcomes measurement and equity in the relation to how we deliver this therapy. So John, I pass the ball on to you, and perhaps you want to mention a little bit more about advanced therapy Wales. I have to say we have seen some interesting things from Wales lately, including for medical devices, but that's for another time. So please.
Hopefully it's all good things, Elena.
Yes, it's very good. It's very interesting. Thanks.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thanks Panos as well, and John for the platform. So we are here today to talk about coordinated ATMP delivery in an infrastructure that's NHS Wales. Although we are quite closely connected with our partners in England, health is devolved in Wales, and we are fortunate enough to have a national programme that's supporting the advanced therapies delivery across Wales. I won't introduce Hannah just yet, I'll wait until partway through the presentation, but I just wanted to give some context before Hannah goes into some of the detail around the real world evidence and outcomes in Wales about some of the national programme and what we aim to deliver. So Panos has already mentioned some of this about what are advanced therapies and their classification, I suppose, of medicines. There are some examples that we deliver in Wales. So gene therapies are one heteronaca gene that John just mentioned there for haemophilia B is a perfect example of a nice recommended therapy that we deliver. We also deliver therapies in clinical trial phase, such as the Huntington's, which I'll touch upon in a bit. There's also somatic cell therapies and tissue engineered products, so things like Spherox for a knee cartilage replacement can fall within that kind of bag. Now, there's a specific term, and Panos referenced it, it's ATMPs, Advanced Therapies Medicinal Products. We in Wales look at the term in its wider context, so looking at things like complex therapies. So what is advanced therapies in terms of a background and some context? We're a Welsh Government funded programme, and back in 2019 the Welsh Government decided to publish a statement of intent which said that they'd look at developing the infrastructure and the requirements to deliver these advanced therapeutics. So as the therapies were starting to come through, Welsh Government set out the statement of intent and also put some funding towards a national programme to help deliver against this. So we've got an all Wales remit, but we're in quite a fortuitous place with it because we sit within the NHS infrastructure itself. So we help provide some pump priming funding, and we help provide some central points of access for the NHS people to get access to some of the information that's required. We do have some governance within that, so we talk about adoption of advanced therapies in the system and research and development through 2 working groups. And like I said, we have an all Wales remit, so feeding in from the programme board, we feed directly back into Welsh Government then, so we support the infrastructure by supporting with lobbying, developing business cases and what like. We are also a core member of the Advanced Therapies Treatment Centres, and we co-lead the Midlands Wales ATTC, so you see 2 logos on my background, and this is where we met John Spores and some of the great work that I mentioned that he's doing and leading on with another colleague of his, Lawrence, as part of that network. So our remit and role is basically, as I've explained, we provide a central source for the resources. We try to provide a strategic view, so we bring in each of the stakeholders to provide a strategic view for where the infrastructure needs to go next. We do support directly research activity in the clinical and preclinical space, and we do provide a bit of an interface for commercial and industry to come in to Wales. So we want to act like a front door, but we also want to elevate the activity that's happening in Wales and put it on a bit of a platform, really. And there's a good saying, we are the grease in the glue, so we're not always visible, but we do try to ensure that the wheels keep moving. As you can imagine, it's a very complex space. This looks like my daughter, my 5-year-old has drawn it, but I promise it all makes sense to some people. Essentially, you've got Advanced Therapies Wales and the programme board in the centre, very co-linked with patients and public. So we've got the patient and public voice throughout all of our work streams, which is really important, I think, to developing that national vision. But you can see each of the circles are key stakeholders where we link in across the Welsh ecosystem and the UK ecosystem. So these things are really complex to deliver, and for such a niche area and such a complex area, you are required to have all of these stakeholders to help deliver it. So we do have a delivery plan. This is written based on the statement of intent and where we want to go within the next 4 years now. So we published it in January 2025 when we had ministerial endorsement for it, and it is basically underpinned by 4 goals and 3 themes. So we're looking at how we nurture the advanced therapies ecosystem in Wales, which is looking at the infrastructure and how we best support it. Developing pathways for healthcare, so it's how patients can access the therapies, so looking at commissioning models with the JCC, Joint Commissioning Committee, apologies, and looking at things like patient access, horizon scanning too. We've got a goal on research and capacity and capability in the research sector, so looking at preclinical and clinical research, how we can best prop that up. And then the goal 4 is around providing our central point of access, and that's all around our comm strategy and how we communicate to our stakeholders, things like developing our website and developing our plans, etc. All of this is underpinned by 3 cross-cutting themes then. So we've got patient and public involvement throughout everything. Workforce is key to the development of these therapies and how they come through. And then we rely on those strategic partnerships that I showed in the previous slide to be able to deliver some of this stuff. And all of this is working together towards our vision, which is to deliver the benefits of these therapies to improve the health, well-being and prosperity of the people of Wales, although we do have more of a wide remit when it comes to the Midlands Wales things. So that's our Advanced Therapies Wales programme. We also are co-leads, as I mentioned, of the ATTC network. So this is a network that's coordinated by the Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult in the UK, and it's built up of 4 centres. So we've got the Northern Alliance, which is Newcastle and Scotland, IMATCH, which is Manchester and the Christies, London Advanced Therapies, which is the 4 big centres in London, and we've got Midlands Wales, which are all the red dots in the middle there. And we basically co-lead each of the centres to help improve the UK's attractiveness for HMP clinical trials through clinical trial acceleration. Now, there is funding attributed to this, and this is all attributed to accelerating clinical trials, but we've also been leading on a work stream called Patient and Public Involvement Engagement, and this is through a work group called ATMP Engage, which is where we first met John. Part of that is raising public awareness of these therapies as they come through, promoting equity of access to ATMP clinical trials, and the piece of work that John and his colleague Lawrence will add a lead in on is the patient charter for advanced therapy medicinal products, which is the first of its kind really, and it's an exemplar piece of work, and we're hoping to see how that progresses and support how best we can. So essentially, I just wanted to flag this slide, but it'll be available in the slides afterwards. We have published a year 1 annual report, so people can have a look to see what the kind of things that we've been doing are. It's quite useful to see where some of the key challenges are and what we've been able to deliver with relatively little funding, but some key coordination across the ecosystem. And some of those examples include, so we've developed a clinical expertise forum across the following specialty lead roles, so solid tumour oncology, hemato-oncology, apheresis, nursing, and regulatory capability and expansion of clinical capacity. Sorry, so a bit of a mouthful this time of the morning. And as part of that clinical expertise forum, which is the first of its kind really in the UK for advanced therapies, we're looking to develop the ecosystem even further. So providing that funding for a clinical lead will give us the chance then to accelerate clinical delivery of these therapies and provide support for the infrastructure. So it's taking some of those key challenges back to a single forum where we can get some real clinical expertise. So that's really exciting. The other thing we've been up to is we support the Advanced Neurotherapy Centre, and the lead investigator there, Prof Gray, his notable mention is part of the UniCures trial, which is the first gene therapy clinical trial in Huntington's disease. He is the only surgical site in the administration for the UK, and they were successful in delivering this phase of the clinical trial, and it is a real strength for us in Wales. We'd like to put it on a platform, but essentially neuro is one of our key areas of priorities for research in Wales. Another key ambition we've got in Wales, and why Wales is set apart, is we've got the Wales Commercial Research Delivery Centre. So it's part of the Wales Alliance. So it's a single place where all the research centres are put under one umbrella as part of that investment to provide the unification and joined up approach to clinical trial delivery. So it is really valuable. And just on my last slide before I hand over to Dr. Hannah Crocker, I just wanted to highlight some of the challenges with delivering some of these therapies, not just in the clinical setting, but on a national basis. So because they are quite complex, there are things around funding for infrastructure and service delivery which need to be considered. Things like apheresis capacity and other service capacity also needs to be considered, both in clinical trial and standard care adoption. There is regulatory compliance, as some of these therapies demand quite complex cross-party working and shared care pathways. So this regulatory compliance becomes a little bit different. And then the other one is there needs to be an ability to increase the number of clinical trials in Wales, and that is recognised. As part of standard of care, patients get access to the therapies that are NICE recommended. But with more clinical trials, there's a real opportunity that patients get access to therapies earlier on in their development, and it improves things like equity of access. So that's it from my side. And at this point, I want to hand over to Dr. Hannah Crocker, who's going to talk more around the real world data initiative and within her role within the Joint Commissioning Committee. Thanks, Hannah.
Thanks, John. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, perfect. Hi everyone. I'm Hannah and I work at the NHS Wales Joint Commissioning Committee. So we commission specialised services for the population of Wales, including advanced therapies within that. So thought we'd sort of give you some examples of the types of projects we've got ongoing in Wales at the moment. So next slide, please, John. So I think Panos covered quite a bit of this, but I thought I'll sort of take through a very high level summary rather than going into detail. So ultimately, why are we looking at real world data? Obviously, clinical trial data is essential and fantastic. The amount of data you can get from them is amazing. But generally, they're often based on small patient numbers or really narrowly defined inclusion criteria. So actually, clinical trials are telling us what can happen. Whereas real world data, then, the great thing about it, especially if you're looking, post launch and while it's in the market, it tells you what actually does happen over time with real world data, real world effectiveness in real populations. So, as commissioners, we want to know what the real value and impact of the treatments that we do commission for Wales and what that impact is over time in routine care. So next slide, please, John. And why are we looking at advanced therapies in particular? Essentially, it's a really good starting point. So as both John and Panos have covered earlier, we've got cell therapies, gene therapies, tissue engineered products, and a lot of these therapies that are currently available are often treatment options where there's little to no other treatment options. So, there might not be any treatments available for that patient group, or it might be that they're at the end of a pathway. So it really gives hope to patients and their families and their loved ones for a real potential to improve their quality of life. So there's great opportunities with advanced therapies, but they're not without their challenges. So, you've got very, very high upfront costs in quite a few of the cases. And as everyone said before, the high levels of uncertainty is really what makes advanced therapies different. I think you've got that great expectation of potentially curative outcomes and long-term effectiveness, but you haven't actually got that long-term data. So I think they're basically a perfect place to start. So next slide, please, John. So, if you think about advanced therapies, they're relatively new medicines. They didn't really exist 50 years ago. So we haven't got 50 years worth of effectiveness data to say what is going to happen in 50 years time. So we've got limited longitudinal data. The cohorts, as I said, are often small because they're either for rare diseases or maybe at the end of a pathway. We are seeing some in the pipeline, as John Spores sort of knows a lot more about that. But, we are seeing some in the pipeline that may be larger cohorts in the future. But our current available advanced therapies in the UK, at least, are generally relatively small numbers, which means we've got manageable data sets to sort of start with advanced therapies and have that model that we can then use in other commissioning areas in the future. And then it's the combination of that really high cost with the really high expectations. It gives a shared incentive for, clinicians, patients, their families, and commissioners and payers to really need and want that value insight. What is that impact over time? Are they providing the value, and are they meeting those expectations that we all think they're going to? So it kind of gives that perfect place to start. So next slide, please, John. So it kind of comes back then to what are we doing in Wales? So I lead the ATMP Outcomes programme, so we're also Welsh Government funded, and we work really closely with Advanced Therapies Wales programme that John just presented on. And we're based, as I said, within the Commissioners of Specialised Services in Wales. And we really want to move from that uncertainty into insight. So we're working to better understand the real world impact of advanced therapies in Wales, not using UK data, not using English data, not using American data, using Welsh data, and not just from clinical trials, what actually happens when they're being delivered to patients in routine care. So next slide, please, John. So one of our key pieces of work is looking backwards at what data do we already have in the system. So retrospectively, what do we have and what can we learn from what we have? And if you look at the range of advanced therapies that are currently available in the UK, CAR-T is sort of the most widely used, and it's mainly for diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. But we've got quite a lot of data on diffuse large B-cell lymphoma as a sort of, the data is facilitated by the EBMT and the BSBMT CT registries. So we've got a lot of data, and it's really high quality and it's really well collected. But actually, what are we comparing that to if we're going to look at a value assessment? So if we don't have that comparative baseline of what the landscape looked like before we had CAR-T, ultimately you might have amazing CAR-T data, but it can then just become an isolated data point. So we're working backwards to look at what were the treatment pathway and what were the outcomes and what were the attrition along the pathway, etc., in diffuse large B-cell lymphoma in Wales, so that we can then, once we have enough data for the CAR-Ts, we can then kind of do that value assessment. But without those building blocks, we're never going to be able to really look at the value added. So next slide, please, John. And then a separate part of our programme is looking sort of into the future and what's that future data landscape that we want in the future. So, what data do we want to be collecting? How are we going to do that? And one of our first outputs in this area is an activity dashboard, essentially. So a commissioning dashboard for advanced therapies in Wales. And it answers sort of the basic but essential questions: who had what, where and when. And then it allows us to look at that utilisation in Wales that I know Panos touched on earlier. And, what's the utilisation and what does that look like over time? Is there equity of access across Wales? And it allows you to really get a picture of the value of advanced therapies in Wales. So this data is actually from last year's dashboard, because we're updating it annually, and the next one will be due in the next couple of months. So the data is validated to last March, but as a small-ish country of 3 million people, even though the currently available advanced therapies are for relatively rare diseases, we had over 100 patients in Wales receive advanced therapy by that date, which we thought was great. Unsurprisingly, they're dominated by CAR-Ts, because we know that CAR-T is available for the largest indication. And over 60% of them were actually delivered within Wales, so close to home for our population. And then looking into the future, we're hoping to add to this then with actually collating all that data on the long-term outcomes. We might not be able to understand what that long-term outcome is for a good couple of years yet, especially if we've got really low patient numbers in some of the indications. But if you don't start now, you're never going to have the data. So, we've got future plans looking at outcomes and costings to really be able to do that value assessment in the future, and not forgetting the patient level data as well. So, what's the most important to the patients and their families? So we're working with the clinical teams to make sure that we collect PROMs and PREMs, so the patient reported outcomes and experience measures, at T=0 or even before if we can. So we've got a baseline and then what happens after they receive the therapies. So next slide, please, John. So this is my last slide, just as an overarching, what's our goal? We want to be able to make a long-term insight framework for advanced therapies in Wales, and use that then to scale across different commissioning areas in the future. But ultimately advanced therapies is that great place to start. So underlying all of it, obviously, we want to commission treatments that provide the best outcomes for patients, that improve their quality of life and have sustainable and equitable access across Wales. So hopefully our data will be able to bring that together. So thank you very much. And next slide, please, John, you can finish up if you want.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. It's just to say, please keep in touch with us. I know we've just given a bit of a presentation about what we do, but if you want to see more about the delivery plan, there's a QR code there, or it's all available on the website. We'd be really keen to work with anyone and any ideas as they come through. So please get in touch and follow us, and yeah, keep an eye on what we're doing in Wales. Thank you for the platform. Much appreciated.
Thank you both very, very much. I think this was extremely comprehensive and also examining and very concrete examples for ATMPs in terms of what numbers we're looking at, how small some numbers are, what concrete limitations we have of the extreme amount of data that is collected to make a sound decision. And I don't only mean proms and prems, but all the array. Before we go into perhaps synthesizing, since particularly Deepak is with us and Panos is with us, I have a question because we have also another dimension happening. We are talking to the Middle East and globally, and we have already a United Kingdom split into different, if you like, commissioning entities, and you are Wales, of course. I don't know if everybody's familiar with commissioning, so I will say that it's a more complex, it's not just ordering things or assessing things, and Hannah and John, please feel free to step in. It's a much more complex procedure of mapping the needs of your population and identifying things you may need and building forward. But maybe you want to comment on the commissioning aspect for the audience, because I think it was mentioned a lot, so they have to better understand the role. Yeah, for those that are outside NHS.
No problem. So yeah, essentially as within Wales, we commission, but I will define that a little bit more now, any NICE recommended advanced therapies or specialised services. So essentially if NICE have done their health economics assessment and said, yes, we can do this on the NHS, what our teams in NWJCC then do is we map that pathway out. We make sure it's actually available to patients. We pay for it ultimately. So it's a very complicated, multifactorial piece, I guess. So yeah, it's that there's a new treatment and you've got a patient who needs it. It's everything in between. So, you know, the pathways, the clinical teams, the payments and everything. So hopefully that gives a little bit of... Yeah.
I think if somebody's interested, they could probably find it. It's almost 10 years old when commissioning started becoming more profound. It's from the King's Fund showing how it works. But in this context, and as I said, since Deepak is with us, a question to all of you, and Panos, please, if you like, join us in this discussion. So a question to all of you, to what extent do you think the current way we're discussing data hubs, and this could be UK data hubs or Wales data hubs, or EU, EHDS, and so on, to what extent do you think the needs we have for ATMPs are actually taken into consideration? And also, to what extent would you say, in your own capacity, would you feel that we have all the elements to trust data at the current level where we are now, and to even proceed with synthesizing AI with all the caveats that we have there for the small populations? And I will start with John, but then maybe we go across. So John.
Yeah, I think data is going to be critical in all of this, and I think, as Panos mentioned, the very, very high cost of the therapies, we need to be absolutely sure that the decisions we're making are the right decisions, and that we follow in from all of that information, so that we've got the best outcome for the patients, essentially. So from our perspective, in a data and joining up a services perspective, it's about how we recognise ATMPs within the current landscape, recognise their complexities, and how we shape digital systems around that. So a less direct answer to your question, but from our perspective, we'd be looking at it from a holistic view.
Okay, thank you. Hannah?
Yeah, I think building from what John just said, with that sort of making the right decision at the right time and having that long-term longitudinal data to be able to reassess that if need be going forward. You know, if I guess that's still part of the commissioning I didn't say earlier, is also afterwards it's making sure that safety and quality is actually up to standard. And I think, you know, without the data, how can you say if it is still the best option for those patients and things like that? So I think that's really important. And also I think touching on what you were saying about data hubs, I think one of the key issues we might get into, but it isn't necessarily not fixable, but it's something I think we need to work through, is information governance and sharing of data, and at what level we can do that and what level we can't. And, you know, England versus Wales data, and, you know, if they're in different systems, how do we make sure that we align at that early phase, so that if we're all collecting the same types of data, it makes it easier later on in the process to aggregate on a bigger level anonymously.
You had I thought it was a very nice phrase. You said we start collecting at T0, or ideally even before, or along the lines. And these populations, mostly for ATMPs, are high cost, but also almost rare diseases, even when they're not rare diseases, because of the unique aspects, biomarker-driven strategies. But thank you. Deepak?
Thank you. I've really enjoyed these ATMP presentations this morning. It's a field I'm touching briefly, but really found these presentations very informative. But if you don't mind, I'm going to make a point that takes us a little bit sideways. Sometimes we find that niche populations or niche specialized areas become forerunners, trailblazers of a more general situation. So for these expensive, novel therapies where the evidence is often difficult to accumulate because the patient numbers are small, and I think there was a very interesting triangle that Panos had on one of his slides. But what it forces is to go away from a collect data and evidence before you go to market and then just throw it in the market and hope for the best, through to saying I'm going to use the term lifelong learning. We use that for people when they are professionals, they keep learning. But I think here I would play the game and say lifelong learning is about the product. Through the course of the product, we have to keep learning about it as we go. And that also introduces another area that health is very bad at, which is formalizing what happens to the patient, commonly known as outcomes. Tick box outcomes frequently used, really good, meaningful outcomes, rarely invested in. And I think that what triggers me, and I apologize, I'm not into the molecular science behind these magical treatments. What fascinates me is how can we learn from your communities, not single communities, you're a multi-stakeholder matrix of communities, about what are the data points that are meaningful to inform the manufacturer, to inform the reimburser, to inform the patient and the clinician, and the health systems and society, because you cover all of them with different bits of your data. How can we scale up so that every patient on every therapy downstream is routinely collecting the relevant data to inform meaningful, again, a cliche value-based care decision-making? It's opening my eyes, but I'm afraid I'm giving you a rather incoherent answer because I'm still scrambling with my own thoughts. But I'm really stimulated by these discussions, but almost saying, I don't care about your ATMP use case. What I care about is what you're learning so we can generalize from it. And I apologize, that's not meant to be insulting, it's meant to be congratulatory.
No, but this is quite interesting. The ATMPs are indeed leading in some ways the way, because similarly rare diseases did to some extent, and rare cancers, because
well, that was the other historic trailblazer. Yes. Personalized medicine is just every disease is a rare disease. isn't it?
Exactly. 20 years ago in the evidence-based medicine domain, N of 1 was not, and now everything is going to become in clinical trials kind of N of 1. But Panos, maybe you would like to comment on consolidated version of what we have heard?
Right. Sure. So
And also my apologies. I have, because we will circle back to it, I have an extra challenge for you. What is very often forgotten, but it's very important, and there is a lot of, not noise, but there's a lot of emphasis about it in the EU and globally, boosting innovation, rewarding innovation, boosting competitiveness, ensuring the mechanisms we have for HTA and reimbursement are actually, and value, as Deepak said, putting the value back to this discussion. Do you see this as actually actively happening or accidentally happening or not at all in relation to these products? Because of course these products are very, very few. They're just starting to come, and then we know there will be masses of them coming up. So thanks.
yeah. So I can speak for the UK following Brexit. What happens in the EU, it's a separate story, although there is a lot of effort to align. So there have been a lot of initiatives in the UK to create a better environment for the adoption of A, rare diseases, and B, ATMPs, and they kind of go along each other. So for example, when it comes to data collection to support the post-launch the post-launch phase of innovative therapy, launching with limited data. The efforts started back in 2019, 2020, where working groups came together, driven by government initiatives, to identify how best to make this happen. And at the time, it was proposed that horizon scanning should be informing registry optimization well in advance of marketing authorization, in order for a registry to be readily available when is needed and not to cause delays. Now, looking at today, and these working groups continue to evolve in terms of direction of travel. Both myself and Hannah are sitting in one of them under the Department of Health and Social Care. If we look at today, we have just under 20 ATMPs that have secured reimbursement in the UK. In terms of indication, but in terms of brand name, it's just under 15, I think, last time I looked at it. And if we look across the UK, the numbers are larger than what we saw for Wales, naturally, because Wales is only a small percentage of the UK population. And so far, the decision makers who are looking for decision grade real world evidence have managed with the number of ATMPs that we have. But the problem is that as more ATMPs are coming to market, that's going to put much greater pressure on the digital infrastructure that we have. And also what makes it perhaps more challenging is that MHRA is now working on a rare disease pathway that theoretically will accelerate even further this N=1, N=2, and so on to patient, and they will be launching with significantly greater uncertainty. So this is a good time for getting things addressed.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't think you speak only for the UK. I think you speak globally. We see similar trends, perhaps with variability in the numbers or in the maturity level, but the discussions that we're having in Middle East or India or Europe or UK are similar. But since John made a comment about patients. Maybe a last question to all of you, because ultimately we all, I think, adopt a people-centered, patient-centered approach, and we started discussing trust in the context. My personal experience and also, I mean, work and personal, is that patients, particularly patients that may benefit from ATMPs, families that have had patients benefiting from ATMPs, rare disease patients and so on, have a very high degree of willingness to share data, much higher than, let's say, that we would have anticipated or perhaps better studied. So people are generally willing to share the data. I don't necessarily see equal level of awareness or excitement when it comes to artificial intelligence, but I would like to ask all of you, particularly for these products, do you think that it's an imperative that we collaborate across borders? And if yes, what would be the one element that would really change trust of policymakers or of patients or of regulators in terms to be able to do that? Would it be different regulatory frameworks? Would it be regulatory sandboxes? Would it be, let's say, more dialogue in terms of implications? Would it be better access mechanisms or incentives for the industry, for the developers? So please feel free. And of course, always keeping in mind that the ATMPs are coming, as I said, but indications vary. So I start in reverse now, perhaps order with Deepak again. I know ATMPs are molecular, Deepak, but I don't think there's much difference to any innovative technology in how it's accepted.
No, when you refer to across countries, I think the very simple statement I'll make is that once we narrow the patient profile to a highly specialized group, no country is big enough. Exactly. And therefore the country ceases to be a relevant boundary, either for learning or for deploying, for evaluating, monitoring, anything. I'll leave it there, let the experts take over.
You're all experts. So, John?
So I totally agree with Deepak and yourself, Elena. I think from my personal experience, the patients public that I've spoken to, a lot of them assume that their data is already being used for research, and a lot of them are objectively happy with that. I think that my point around the uptake and the patient voice, though, is there is a difference between therapies that are either your last line of defence, so it's more of a dichotomous decision, versus treatments that are, although they may improve your outcome, maybe they may be too soon in their patient journey for that treatment. And I think there's a big difference between their willingness to share that data, because some of these therapies, there's a long-term outcome follow-up for them. So we're talking 15, 20 years. That's different from normal therapies, and that can be a big barrier, I think. But an open dialogue between patients and public and all the medicines manufacturers is key to get these issues out on the table early so they can be resolved. This open dialogue is key to informing policy and changing the way that healthcare systems provide what they provide. So just some thoughts on it.
Thank you. And also different time points, because sometimes this is I know it may sound a very basic point, but people do change their minds depending on what they're experiencing in the system. Very recently we had a discussion, most likely reason to leave a trial is what you're living, how you're experiencing, not necessarily clinically good or bad outcomes. So it's a big discussion. So thanks for flagging that. And I think an apology from me, maybe also from Paul, because we should have included the patient community in this discussion as well, I think, in our panel today, and it could have been easily done. So something to correct, amend in the next round. Hannah, please, on this aspect.
Yeah, so
not on my comment on that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. So I guess that you could go off in so many directions from your question. So I'm going to pick one and go with, I think, the transparency of what data's being collected and what it's being used for and what decisions that could lead to. So I think, if we're transparent from the outset and as transparent as possible, hopefully that will, increase that trust. And also, as I said about the decision making and going, well, okay, it might help decisions on payments and commissioning and, clinical decision making as well. But also, I think if if we're able to describe to the patient community that actually your data will be used to help other people in situations like yours in the future make more evidence-based informed decisions, I think that from the conversations I've had as well, I think that is a key driver for trust as well. And sort of, if you turn up with, in a very bad scenario and you need an ATMP, because let's face it, a lot of them, no one wants to have an advanced therapy, but if you're in that situation, then it's great that they're available. But knowing, having more data on even demographics, or what would the likely outcome be for someone like me, and having more data you're able to answer that question for a lot more people in a lot more detail. So I think the transparency is key.
To make it easier also for people, a very good example of this is talking to women with breast cancer when they realize hereditability components, BRCA was mentioned earlier, and potential impact on daughters. And so, yes, it's very high. Before I go to Panos, Eric, you have made a couple of comments. I don't know if you would like to step in and comment.
Just,
please.
I have been. That I figured this is the best way for me to engage, at least at the end of the morning session. I'm very happy to engage more thoroughly this afternoon. Fundamentally, one of the things that I talked about at the Health AI conference in Nairobi back in December was around the imperative around participatory governance, and really thinking about what is the economic value of participatory governance. France is one of the few countries that has a citizens' assembly for digitalization of health. Frankly, it costs them probably 3 to 5 million euro a year. And the value of the trust that it creates is literally tens of millions, both in terms of adherence to patient programs, adoption of digital tools, and use of things for preventative measures. But I think creating that economic case is one of the things that we can and must do, because as much as we're talking about this, we need to be thinking about what is the end target from this work, which is around a patient-engaged, patient-centered health system, and what are the things that we need to do to get there. And a big part of what we need to get there isn't talking about the fancy technologies we need to implement. It's about building the strong foundations of trust and data to enable the cool technologies. And a big part of that is really making an unequivocal business case for the policymakers to understand that this is an investment in your future that you have to do. This is no longer optional to do it yourselves and think technology knows best. They don't. People know best. We need to invest in people.
Thank you for I don't know if you were in the first part of the session, but thank you for
saying
I
was.
This. Well, then, because you're echoing back to what we said about investing in training, investing in quality assurance mechanisms, and so on. So it is building a business case as well. So thank you very much for this good summation, which is saving me a summation, and also is putting an extra layer from a ICT perspective. Panos, last but not least, comments on that?
I'm just going to make one comment, because Elena, you did mention AI and how that can perhaps help address evidence gaps. So it's an area that I have been very active and engaging with MHRA and various other organizations, actually across Europe. So the feedback that we have been receiving from regulators in terms of using machine learning from analogous products to fill in gaps for a certain product in development is a little bit disappointing when it comes to ATMPs specifically, because they're very, very complex therapies, and all it takes is a little change, a little step in the manufacturing process, and they claim that that could potentially be a very, very big risk from a regulatory perspective. And their recommendation has been start with something that is less complex than ATMPs, or if you do want to concentrate on ATMPs, find a niche area that can create more reliable data. And in that context, such an area potentially may be safety considerations for gene therapies that are using a particular construct such as AAV. But that specific aspect related to the AAV is possibly something that can result in more reliable machine learning. But broadly speaking, ATMPs would be perhaps the last adopters by regulators of AI.
Exactly. Thank you very, very much for flagging this. As I said, there's a lot of enthusiasm and sometimes hype. It's changing. And also you mentioned something which is also for another meeting, the challenging of manufacturing for ATMPs in any jurisdiction. I think we are exactly on time. I don't know, Paul, there's little time for summation, but I think we can move drafting one step forward, but perhaps you would like to conclude. I would like to thank all of you, including for staying around for 2 hours, and Eric for all the comments and for taking the floor. So Paul, over to you.
And a round of applause for Elaine, our moderator.
Yeah,
I would
for
ask
everyone.
a
Thank
round
you.
of applause.
And again, sorry for the voice.
No, that's something. Thank you so much, dear panelists, guest speakers, and all the participants in this think tank session. It's really great to be here. Well, and we are past due time, but the audience in social media increased as we passed the time of the end time of this program in the morning. Thank you so much. And thank you also to our dear volunteers who are with us, Elaine, Elaine and Emaji. Thank you for being with us, and see you in the afternoon.
Thank you very much. It was a wonderful
Everybody
session.
have a great day.
Thank you.
Glad
Yes,
you enjoyed
thank
it.
you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
Go.